Call to order the March 21st, 2016 meeting of the Arlington Redevelopment Board, being recorded by ACMI. We are here for a public hearing this evening. I'll get to that in a minute, but because there are so many people here tonight, I'd like the board to introduce itself. I am Andrew Bernal, the chair.
Mike Kerr.
Ken Lau.
Andy West.
And our staff this
And
evening.
Jennifer Reed, the Director of Planning and Community Development. Laura Weiner, Assistant Director.
Thank you all for coming. We have several items on the agenda this evening, so before I open the public hearing, I just want to go over a couple of rules. We'd ask that everyone step up to the microphone over here when it's time to speak. Before you begin your comments, please state your name and your address. And I would ask everyone to please keep your comments brief tonight. We won't be enforcing it, but if we could all adhere to a 2-minute time limit on any comments, I would appreciate it. Please also allow people to finish their comments before you interject or state.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, could you speak into the microphone? It's a little hard to hear you.
I don't think it's a condition. I may just need to speak louder this evening, given the size of the room. Microphone, name and address when you speak, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. And with that, I will open the public hearing for the 2016 annual town meeting proposed zoning bylaw amendments. First up, we have Article 6, which is regarding mixed use in business and industrial zones. And I will turn the floor to Laura Weiner for a brief overview.
We're just going to give you an overview. We're not going to go through every detail of the proposal. This proposal came directly out of the master plan. One of the highest priorities for people in the master planning process was to revitalize the business districts and to allow greater development in the business districts. So the mixed-use proposal is a way to encourage a new type of development that's not now allowed. Our current bylaw allows both residential and commercial in the commercial business zones, but they have a different set of requirements and a different set of parking requirements as well as dimensional requirements, and it's just very difficult to build mixed use in the business zones. This article only affects the commercial corridors and the industrial district. It will allow more development in those zones and will bring residences into the business districts, which will in turn bring customers for the restaurants and the stores, and more presence at night, and just it is intended to really just bring more life into our business districts. The article itself first adds a couple of definitions. It adds a definition for mixed use, and it adds 2 industrial type definitions of things that we either don't allow now or are hard to do, or maybe can only do them in the industrial zones. They're meant to be sort of some of the newer types of businesses. It includes food preparation and beer, making beer, and digital media and things like it. Just a number of new types of industries. And the 4th definition we're adding is step back, which is that the proposal for mixed-use properties is that the first 3 stories can be right up against the sidewalk, and then after that they have to go back a little bit so that it from the street they don't feel as tall. We added to the business districts and amend a number of other things that have to be amended. This is a long article and it seems complicated, but it's just that there's many places that it had to be added into the bylaw. And also, lastly, every type of mixed use would need a special permit from the ARB so that they can kind of keep an eye on how it's going and what type of development is being proposed.
Okay. Open the floor for public comment. Again, if you could line up with the microphone over here, state your name and address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Floretti, 56 Adams Street, and thank you for putting this article forward. This article, in some ways, is a duplication of one that was put forward 4 years ago before a town meeting, which was defeated. And I'd like to address a number of points related to it. First, on these definitions, which really aren't part of mixed use, but are artisanal fabrication and artistic and creative production. And in particular on the second one, I think you have to look at what the underlying uses are allowed in the zoning district, because it's allowing quite a few things by right that I think now are currently prohibited. And I'm not sure, for example, if you are an artistic welder or an artistic sculptor, that you should be allowed to put some of these things in, say, a B2 zoning district by right, when you couldn't do that if you were making gravestones or were welding in your automotive shop. And so I think there needs to be some more consistency there. My larger concern, though, is with the definition of mixed use at all, and it's really too loosey-goosey. In particular, the way I would read it is it would allow one or more disallowed uses right now in a particular zoning district to occur there. And the reason is that once you combine these two uses, it becomes mixed use, even if though individually they would not be allowed at all. And again, I think you need to look at the underlying uses that are allowed within a particular zoning district and combine those into something called mixed use before you get into all of the other allowed dimensional requirements there. Let's see, under B1, it talks about mixed-use structures without retail space. I think that's a good thing, but I think you need to change the table of use regulations to reflect that and not just put it in the definition. And then under amending section 4.04, I think there's a problem there because it doesn't reflect mixed uses or multiple uses on the same lot that aren't mixed uses. In the business district, you can have more than one residential use on a lot. It's not mixed use, but it seems to me it's no longer allowed. It's no longer considered or reflected in the requirements of section 4.04. Or if you have residential uses and commercial uses in different buildings on the same lot, it no longer meets the definition of mixed use, but it is, and then therefore it's no longer considered in this section. But when we get into the dimensional changes, I also had a number of comments there. And in particular in B1, for example, I think you've created a tremendous loophole by not putting any minimum lot area for a mixed-use lot. Currently, if you want to do residential and mixed use, you have to have a 6,000 square foot lot. What this would allow is very small lots of no more than 2,500 square foot or just above that for residential use and a very small amount of other use. And actually that's another point I wanted to make about the definition, is the definition for mixed use does not specify how much non-residential use is required. You could have a trivial amount of non-residential use as part of that structure and it'd be called mixed use, and therefore it gets all the benefits of mixed use when in fact it's really just a residential structure. And so that relates to this issue I have with the mixed use not having any minimum lot size in the B1 zoning district, as any home or any other use currently has. Let's see, in the B2 zoning district, and this is something that occurs quite often in subsequent zoning districts, there's this very strange split between lots above 20,000 square feet and below 20,000 square feet. And typically in the zoning bylaw, when you get into larger lots or wider streets, you allow more intense development. What is here for the mixed use proposal is actually backwards. So if you have a lot of 25,000 square feet, it says you have to have a lower floor area ratio. Frankly, I'm not sure how the building inspector could even enforce this, because if I had a lot of 25,000 square feet, I would say I want to have the higher floor area ratio, because that meets the minimum 0. I don't want to be restricted by the lower floor area ratio for lots above 20,000 square feet. So I really think you're better off just using a single line there for what should be considered the dimensional requirements for mixed use. I would also suggest that in the B2 zoning district, 50 feet is too high. It's really out of character with what the maximum height limit is for all the other uses. And as a general rule, I would suggest that the maximum height for mixed use should be the maximum of the maxima for the other uses within that particular zoning district. As a practical matter, it's hard to tell how much what effect that really has, because in most cases, I believe the properties would be subject to the height buffer restriction that you have in there. But I would suggest again that should be 35 feet as it is for the other uses. The other thing that I find rather odd is when you get into the higher business uses, you say you're trying to promote mixed use, but you're actually imposing more restrictions on mixed use in terms of the minimum lot area per dwelling unit than you are for, say, all residential use. And it seems to me if you're really trying to promote mixed use, you would use certainly nothing stricter than what the existing residential limitations is, say, for a townhouse or an apartment building. This is when you get into the B5 zoning district. So, I apologize for speaking over, but I think there is quite a bit that needs to be done on this. Frankly, because you're not actually changing the zoning districts this year, I'm not sure that it wouldn't be better off to put this off until next year when you can consider these things in more detail and combine them with actual changes to the underlying zoning districts so that it makes more sense to have coherent districts next to each other rather than ones that are going to have different dimensional requirements for mixed use and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Loretti. Any further comments on this article? Feel free to form a line if you'd like.
Thank you. My name's Ralph Wilmer, 17 Walnut Court. I'm a member of the Master Plan Implementation Committee and have been working on this issue alongside the Planning and Community Development Department for a while. So I'm just going to, we have some written comments and I'll just quickly summarize it for this particular article, but the Master Plan Implementation Committee supports this article as drafted. It was a high priority as identified in the master plan, so the Implementation Committee felt that we should jump on this as soon as we can in order to implement it in accordance with the timetable set forth in the master plan. Mixed-use development is not a new concept in town, considering buildings like the Capitol Theater building, which was built in the early 20th century, and it's a prime example of retail, entertainment, and residential uses contained within a single development, and is beloved by many Arlington residents. This building would not be allowed under today's zoning. The local economy has changed significantly since the current zoning bylaw was written in the 1970s, and our region's economy is largely dominated by the service sector and emerging growth businesses, many of which are based on artisanal fabrication and artistic and creative production. We can take advantage of these changes in the marketplace by changing our bylaws to allow these uses in business and industrial districts. In addition, the proposed changes will promote the development of much-needed housing along the commercial corridors that are accessible to public transportation services. The town can experience a net revenue increase from this type of development because it has a relatively small impact on town services. Lastly, allowing mixed-use development in commercial corridors could add to the revitalization of the town's business districts by adding customers for restaurants and local businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rowland. Further public comments? I'll turn it over to the board. Mike.
No, I think we've discussed this quite a bit along the way, so if anyone's been paying attention to what we've been saying.
Okay.
No, I support this.
Yeah,
We think
let's
we
do it.
have this, we have talked this out and reviewed most of the issues. I think it's a good thing for the city.
That's
Hello? Okay. I support this article. I think it's good for the city, for the town. We've discussed all these issues, and we don't have any more comments on it.
Could you just go over what we we might have discussed in the past for people who may not have been here before.
That would be an awkward position. Well, we've talked about encouraging development and growth in this corridors, and by adding this mixed-use concept and making it a little more favorable for developers, contractors, owners to want to participate in this. I mean, you can't just say we want housing or we want more business. You have to make it in such a way where it's encouraging for owners, developers to come in here while also being mindful of the neighbors and the neighborhood. And things have changed. And I think we just have to respond to that and try to control it in a fair and mindful way. And I think this does attempt to do that.
Yeah, and I'll just add, if we're going to go over what we had discussed. So a couple things. Number one is we really do appreciate the master plan implementation committee's views on this. They spent quite a bit of time on it. Really appreciate them going very deep into this. We also took public comment along the way. And one thing that I think resonated with us were some of the height issues, and for that, those have come down. And more importantly, there has been setbacks that have been placed. Step backs that have been placed as you start getting higher to decrease the massing on the street, which certainly makes me feel a lot better about what it is that's being proposed here. So those were definitely important parts of the discussion that we had, as well as Ken said, just encouraging mixed use. It is what folks not only want to build, but it's what folks want to live in. So, Andy.
I completely agree, and we've worked long and hard on this with the implementation committee, and for us, partly it's about just the life on the street and making it a great place to come down and have dinner, to have life at night, to have the lights on, to encourage a mix of businesses and residential. I mean, this is great for the town, and we think, and really about a new economy that's coming in. And I think we're very serious about it, and the fact that it's a special permit is part of the deal, because as we move into this new world here, and I should say it's not a new world. This is mixed use is about as old as you can get. So people living in communities close together and so forth down in the business districts. But for Arlington, it's new, and we're going to keep a close eye on it through the special permit process.
Thank you. Echo the comments by my colleagues on the board here. This is something we heard throughout the master plan process over and over again, is that people wanted to see more mixed-use projects, more commercial projects on the ground, more office space, and this is the kind of zoning that will also allow us to add to our residential housing stock, which is something that's been talked about over and over again, and so I fully support this. Thank you. Moving on to the next article, Article 7, parking in business, industrial, and multifamily residential zones. Laura.
This also was one of the recommendations of the master plan. The master plan suggested that, at least in our multifamily zones, that our parking requirement was excessive, and recommended that we change our parking to be more flexible and to reflect what was actually needed in the, particularly in the multifamily and commercial parties. I want to emphasize this has nothing to do with the residential areas, the R1, R0, R2 areas. Does not affect single-family houses and two-family houses. We had a parking assessment done that did find that in many cases, one space per unit was sufficient, and this bylaw amendment will allow to reduce the parking requirement down to as low as 25% of what is required. The developer has to provide something called transportation demand management, which means they have to offer incentives for people to use alternatives such as bicycling, transit, and carpooling, zip car, ride share, those kind of things. Basically, it just provides flexibility to the developers along Mass Ave, Broadway, Warren Street, the commercial areas.
Okay, thank you. Public comment.
Also by special permit, I should add.
My name's Matt from Rubley Street,
What's your last name, Matt?
Paquin.
Thank you.
I would like, I don't know if it's a point of order, but can you guys provide a little bit more of the background in your positions, similar to what you did to the previous article, before the public comment? Because a lot of what you guys said was helpful to maybe some of us to understand a little bit more of either what went into the articles and the thoughts on it, and also your positions and some of the background that's gone into it. Could you do that? Is that allowed?
Typically, what we do is hear comments from the public first, and then the board debates, but certainly take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do I need to repeat my name and address again? Or
No.
have you got it? Thanks.
Thank you.
Just a couple of quick comments on this article. I have some concerns that 25% is too much of a reduction, and perhaps 50% is more appropriate. I believe that was something you considered in an earlier draft, and would suggest that for the transportation demand management, since no one really knows how effective they're going to be, that might be a better choice. But I think there's a couple of technical problems with this article as well. Under 2, well, actually right now you've got that 25%, but then under item 2, it says that you can have parking within 1,000 feet of the building. Now currently, as I understand the bylaw, you can have all of your parking within 1,000 square feet. And it seems to me with the way this is written right now, you're actually making it more difficult to have off-site parking. And I think that's something you need to consider. Then on the second part of this, it talks about text related to section 8.12, and this does seem to apply to the lower numbered residential districts, the R0, R1, and R2 is what it says. But the problem with this is that section 8.12 doesn't apply to those districts, because section 8.12 only applies if you've got 5 or more parking spaces, which you typically wouldn't have in a 1 or 2 family district. So, I'm not sure what to make of this, but what it's talking about is allowing by special permit a reduction up to 80% of the required parking, but it's citing a section of the bylaw that doesn't apply. So I would just point that out. If indeed you're really interested in the more densely used districts, then perhaps you just want to strike this section related to 812, because it's really not appropriate there. Thanks.
This will not end up applying to single-family and two-family houses, but in all zones, there's a requirement that educational uses and religious uses are allowed. So in the case, say you had a daycare center in a neighborhood that had parking or something like that, that's where that would apply. And it only allows that 80% reduction. It doesn't allow it to go down to 25%.
But is this for mixed use or not?
No, it's not, because mixed use is not allowed in those zones.
Mr. Walmer.
Thank you. Speaking again on behalf of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, this is another issue that we spent a lot of time talking about, and we felt that there was a need for increased flexibility in the current off-street parking requirements in the commercial corridors to encourage new developments. So this article increases that flexibility in the parking requirements if developers prepare that transportation demand management plan that was referred to, and if it's approved by the Redevelopment Board. This will also have a positive impact by reducing the reliance on vehicle trips in town and the amount of land devoted to parking. And I'll also add that this is a technique that's been used in many, many communities across Massachusetts and across the country. So it's not something new that is unproven. It's something that has been successfully applied in all sorts of communities across the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Okay, Mike?
No, I mean, we discussed this and, I think we did go back and forth a little bit on how big the reduction should be. At one point, we saw something that said 0, another 50, and I think, I know I felt most comfortable with 25, so.
Ken?
No, I approve this concept. It goes along with the mixed-use Article 6. This is sort of goes joint hand in hand with it. It's a way of encouraging mixed use and controlled development in our town. So,
Thank you. Andy?
Yeah, I agree, Ken. This goes along with mixed use. So it's an important tool, important trend, as a matter of fact, and I think you should all read this MAPC document because it's really talking about what's happening for mixed use, for downtowns. It's no longer full parking requirements for all uses combined. That doesn't make a healthy downtown or a vibrant downtown. So this is important link to mixed use. And we are by special permit as well, so we have a way to keep an eye on this. And a lot of these things that they mention in here, we mention in here, shared parking, that kind of thing, they're all part of a mix of things that can be solutions to reduce parking. So it's a very important part of mixed use.
This gets at a bigger problem in town as well, and that is the problem of parking, where it encourages businesses to encourage their own employees, their own customers to use alternative sources of transportation, bicycles, public transportation, walking. And I think we're going to see, as they put their transportation demand management plans in front of us, how different businesses intend to achieve this in order to make their own businesses and development successful. So again, I fully support this. I think it goes hand in hand with the mixed use article, and I'm inclined to vote for it. Moving on to Article 8, residential zone changes definitions. Laura, could you give a little further background as to the makeup and thinking of these zone changes?
I'll use Ken's over here.
This set of changes is only in the definitions and brings some of our current definitions into line with state building code. It will lower the height of a story from 7'3" to 7 feet, and the height of a basement from 4 foot 6 inches to 3 foot 6 inches. It's not a lot of big changes. This is just really changing some of the definitions to bring them into line with state building code.
Public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. Am I right in understanding that you were asking that those of us involved in the citizen articles also speak now as it relates to the definitions on
Yes,
those that overlap?
As far as they overlap, yes.
Okay, great. I would say in general, I believe our group does support the change that the ARB is proposing. However, we'd like to go a little bit further in eliminating some of the loopholes in how the floor areas are calculated. And if I could, I'd like to address...
Could you point us to the specific bylaw that you're discussing with people in the
Oh,
audience?
sure. I'm going to first, if I could, skip to 17, Article 17, because I think that's a little simpler. Essentially what this does is adopt the 7-foot height limit for the half story as the ARB article does. But what it also does is takes out some of what may be current loopholes in how you calculate that floor area on the third floor. And in particular, it says that dormers, stairwells, closets, and areas dedicated exclusively to mechanical use necessary for the operation of the building will also be counted if they, if they're under a roof or have that 7 foot or more clear height area. And the reason for this is if you look around town at a lot of the structures that are being, or houses that are being constructed now, technically we have a limit of a half story on the 3rd floor. A lot of these houses look a lot more like triple deckers than they do look like houses that have a half story. And if you have the zoning bylaw refer you to the figure that illustrates the half story definition, which is a quaint gable with area under the gabled roof. Doesn't look anything like a triple decker. So anyway, that's, I think, to further support the intent of the ARB's article, we would recommend taking out those areas. Those areas, for example, closets and stairwells are not subtracted if they're on the 1st or 2nd floor from the floor area calculation. It really doesn't make sense to subtract them if you're on the 3rd floor either. So that is the difference, or the addition that Article 17 makes to what the ARB is proposing. The other article is Article 13. And Mr. Chairman, may I share these with the board? What it is it's a red line version that may be a little bit easier to understand.
Please, please do.
Pass that down.
Unfortunately, it's in black and white. But what this does is address both the 7-foot height limitation and also some of the exceptions that are currently written into the zoning bylaw definition of gross floor area. And what it includes, as currently is cellars, and it also includes basements. And so the top of the bylaw change that a group is proposing looks fairly similar to what's currently in the bylaw. We simply move the inclusion of cellars up into the main text at the beginning. And then I'll talk about some of the exceptions to that down below. The other thing it does include, or it clarifies, is that parking garages are included in the definition of gross floor area. And then underneath that, what follows is some of the exclusions. And what's first listed are exclusions that apply to all structures. While it says they apply to 1, 2, and 3 family houses and duplexes, the text below that says they also apply in other cases as well. And so what's excluded is open lattice and enclosed fire escapes, as they currently are, and open porches and balconies. Now, what the bylaw said before, or the current edition of the bylaw says that all weather habitable porches are included. We've changed that to enclosed porches to make it a little clearer about what is meant there. But those are the only exceptions that would apply to 1, 2, and 3 family houses and duplexes. Then what's listed are additional exceptions that apply to other types of structures. And here, as currently in the bylaw, areas used for off-street loading purposes are still excluded, but garages are not. And then the other exclusions that are listed as 4 and 5 in the new version of this are the same as what are currently listed in 2 and 4 as currently written. So, but they would only apply for structures that are not 1 or 2 family or 3 family houses or duplexes. So in essence, what it's saying is for those other types of structures, you're not going to include the areas of the basements and cellars used for mechanical uses, but you would for a 1 or 2 or 3 family home or duplex. Similarly, in the attic, you would not include elevated machinery or mechanical equipment for structures that are not 1 or 2 family homes, duplexes, or 3 family houses. But you would include them if they fall under that 7-foot limit for those types of residential structures. So essentially what this is doing is tightening up what's excluded in the floor area calculation as it applies primarily to 1 and 2 family houses, duplexes, and 3 family houses.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Wellman.
Speaking on behalf of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, we support the amendments. They provide some much-needed clarifications for definitions that are currently unclear or not in conformance with the state building code, and they'll update the bylaw to clarify the definitions in a way that should improve the interpretation of the definitions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Nyberg of 129 Lake Street, Arlington. Can you hear me? It's not working? Not working.
That's
better.
very close, it works.
Yeah, that's better. I'll just talk loud. Sorry, 129 Lake Street, Arlington, Mass. And I may be interjecting just a little bit soon, but first of all, I want to say thank you for all the time and effort you guys have spent on this, hours and hours and hours, because I've lived in Arlington since 1991, and it's a changing community. And I appreciate your proactiveness in making it a vibrant and a living change versus us potentially being stuck in a time that's not working financially, et cetera, for our town. I just wanted to comment quickly on the last speakers. I'm in the real estate business. I buy, sell property. I help buyers. I help sort out new members to our community, people leaving our community. And with lots of new construction, I have not seen any property that I would call a triple-decker. So I think that's not being fully fair to some of the things that are being said. I visualize a 3-story triple-decker, Somerville, Cambridge, full story, not a lot of character, and I think that's not being fair to some people that are making changes in our community. Probably have some different comments. I just want to say, I guess, quickly is I think we're on a little bit of a slippery slope in some of this. I've worked within the system for the last 15 years, buying, selling, developing, adding on, facilitating housing for our community. We have, I think, good zoning regulations. I think people work well with it. I think the building department regulates that in a very good way. And I, like my friend John Warden, we both have properties with very large pieces of land, so some of the restrictions of the zoning are not going to affect us. So as I was pondering this and reading through a lot of the zoning things, my concern is people in Arlington that live on 5,000 square foot lots, smaller lots. I recently owned a house that was a 3,300 square foot lot. Those people are that need the most help are being penalized the most by some of these restrictions. So I think it's important to think this all the way through as we make regulations. Are we doing it to restrict a small group of people who we may or may not like what they're building? Or are we inadvertently going to be penalizing the larger percentage of people in Arlington that live on 5,000 and 6,000 square foot lots and now will not be able to do additions, will not be able to accommodate family members, et cetera. So I'm sure all these articles on all the things they intertwine, but my concern is the one thing I love about Arlington is we have diversity of housing stock, of mixed use, of big homes, of small homes, and I hope that we don't reduce the flexibility of people's property rights and in an inadvertent way create more of an elitist environment in a town that doesn't need to go in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Before the next speaker, I just want to be clear that right now any discussion should be centered on Articles 8 and then 13 and 17 as Mr. Loretti opened up the door. There will be time for discussion on the other articles this evening, especially as far as their specifics go, and we're happy to hear that then, but just in the interest of keeping things orderly, that's where we are right now, and that is what the board will discuss when our turn comes.
Adam Schoen, 93 Madison Avenue. That was my question. I'm fine with Article 8, but are we now also having the discussion on 13 and 17, or are we gonna come back and hit 13 and 17 later?
Discussion's open as to 13 and 17.
So I think Article 8 is fine. I have a problem with 13 and 17, as well as all the others from 12 to 17 that were proposed for the reasons that were just put forth, and I'm fine to come back and speak on each of those when it's time for that, or if it's appropriate now. But I think changing the gross floor area, it seemed very difficult to understand, I think, without having some of the calculations in front of us, exactly what we're talking about, other than maybe a half story being calculated at 7 foot versus not 7 foot, as far as whether we're now including garages or not garages. Is the point of gross area to now say that a garage is included in the calculation of the gross area of your house? It is? Okay.
Mr. Loretti, could you answer at the microphone, please?
Or just loudly.
Or just loudly.
It was just my.
Well, I guess, since we have the building inspector here, this is actually a mystery to me.
Could you actually step to the microphone? Apologize.
Well,
I mean, what the bylaw says is that it says including parking garages except as excluded in one below, and then one below says but excluding areas used for accessory parking garages. And I'm not sure if accessory really means detached or not, but it seems completely contradictory, and perhaps the building inspector can explain the interpretation of that.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, good evening. My name's Michael Beck, 6 Adamian Park, Arlington. Thank you for all your work on this, specifically in regards to the comment about a basement not considered a story unless the ceiling is 3 feet 6 inches. I realize per the comment that it seems to be a very small change, and also a change to bring us into conformity with the state. But my recommendation is we don't conform to the state requirement with this, if that's the case. Personally, I live over by Bishop School, and if you stand in Bishop Playground, you can look around and see all of the hills, the capes and ranches that are there. And I agree that some of them look more than 2 stories, but most of those homes built in the 1940s and 50s, by people returning from war, etc. I live in a house like that, and if you change this from 4 feet 6 inches to 3 feet 6 inches, you will be removing my ability to build a story. Currently, my average height is 3 feet 9 inches because I have a walkout basement. So I just wanted to make that one recommendation, not to change that portion of Article 8. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Joe Bound. I'm a carpenter. I live on 74 Mystic. I'd like to thank the board for hearing me. I'm here to address the zoning amendments. I believe they will hinder my ability to provide for my family. I have a letter from Ned Mahoney and his wife Martha, who were unable to make it tonight. I'd like to read it, and I have copies so you can review them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To whom it may concern, we are writing this letter because we are unable to attend this public meeting of the zoning board on the proposed changes to the zoning bylaws. This letter describes the thoughts held by my wife Martha and I on these proposed changes. We both have lived in Arlington our entire lives, as did my parents and Martha's mother and most of our grandparents. As we read through the proposed changes, we are struck by the depth of how they propose to make it more difficult to accomplish equity building alterations to the properties owned by regular people here in Arlington. If Arlington decides to eliminate and make it more difficult to renovate by tearing down and rebuilding, or to renovate with large second-floor additions, it will severely affect the ability for many homeowners to sell their homes to a larger pool of buyers. This could have a negative effect on the price they might otherwise achieve. These changes are proposed under the false assumption They will preserve the character of Arlington, homes and neighborhoods. The many rehabilitations and rebuilding of homes we have witnessed here in Arlington have vastly improved the homes and neighborhoods involved. The rehabilitation and gentrification thus far have helped create a better and more valuable property market here in Arlington. This has been a tremendous added benefit to all Arlington homeowners. Everyone in Arlington knows the marketplace is very strong due to its prime location, quality school system, and welcoming nature of Arlington's people. For Arlington to now take actions to make the ongoing renewal and gentrification much more difficult will have a detrimental effect on older people with older homes who are approaching or in their retirement, but also on the younger people who have made an investment in the Arlington community. For Arlington Zoning Board to make these proposed changes will cause property investors and home rehabilitation companies to vanish from the Arlington market due to the uncertainty of their ability to make the changes required by the marketplace. It will also cause new buyers considering Arlington to rethink their plans if they can be sure that they can alter their new purchase in the manner they feel will work for them. This will harm all of Arlington homeowners, including the people who support these proposed changes. When Martha sold the Arlington property, which was in her family since 1919, it was because it needed too much work for what she was in a position to undertake. This meant her best market was the home rehabbing community. She received a great deal of interest. However, if those interested parties were limited in their potential options by the threat of not being able to attain special permits, then Martha's options would have been severely limited. It would have also limited her ability to continue to live in Arlington. Because we didn't have these restraints, we were able to remain in Arlington. Now we live in a ranch in a great location in Arlington. One aspect of its potential value, which was an aspect of our decision, was the idea we, or the party we might sell to whenever we are ready to downsize again, could add square footage by adding a second floor. The town's potential changes would disallow and hinder our ability to create our retirement plan by limiting the marketplace for us. Beyond our individual circumstances, these proposed changes would harm the future circumstances of all Arlington homeowners. The companies buying, rehabbing, and reselling homes in Arlington are fulfilling a need in the marketplace. This is helping all homeowners in Arlington to increase their value and better their options. In addition, we have not mentioned the impingement on the rights of homeowners these proposed changes will create. Each homeowner and potential homeowner in Arlington should be against these changes. Although they may sound well-intentioned, they are in fact very harmful to Arlington's future. Future renewal and gentrification is inevitable. So far, it has been a benefit and will continue to be a benefit to the town's homeowners. We should not stand in the way by infringing on people's rights as homeowners, Arlington residents, and Americans. Lastly, we have not mentioned the impending need for Arlington to raise the property tax to pay for improving schools and other long-term projects. Obviously, improving schools will be a benefit. Arlington has become more affluent. Larger homes would mean increased taxes without raising the tax rate as drastically as it might need to be raised. This would also harm all Arlington homeowners. The growth in home size and gentrification should continue without unneeded restrictions. The changes are proposed directly contrary to the will of the marketplace for Arlington homes. The marketplace wants bigger homes. The proposed changes will hurt the real estate market in Arlington. This will hurt Arlington's ability to grow and fund needed changes. The most severe harm will be to the options of older residents with older homes, as well as any homeowner's option to alter their property to attract today's and tomorrow's buyers of bigger, move-in ready homes. We should not be standing in the way of the beneficial changes which have been occurring in Arlington by standing in the way of progress and renewal. We hope everyone in attendance at this meeting and across Arlington will realize just how short-sighted and harmful to everyone these proposed changes will be to our collective futures. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is a very important issue to me, and that's why I miss Dancing with the Stars tonight.
Big Doug Flutie fan.
Hello. My name is Aaron Banker. I live at 103 Bow Street, and I too, like Joe, am a carpenter. Well, a carpenter in training. But I work on houses that you guys are trying to stop with these amendments, whatever you want to call them. And trying to prevent these from being built would be taking away my job, my future. This is what I plan to do with my life. I don't plan to go to college like the normal seniors at high school at Arlington. I plan to become a carpenter and build houses. And I think many of you can't look past the fact that you hate these houses for whatever reasons you have, but you're affecting the younger generation's future and careers in this town. And I may not have a family to feed yet with my job, like Joe, who spoke before me, who this is also affecting, but I do have a future, and you guys are taking that away by trying to prevent these houses from being built. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
John Worden, 27 Jason Street. Since at this point the hearing seems to have turned into sort of a forum to attack the Citizens 7 zoning reform articles, I think it's appropriate that I speak now rather than we get to the particular one I was going to address. I would say to Mr. Nyberg, and I would say to the Mr. Chamberlain, who wrote this letter that was passed out, and to the gentleman who just spoke, that if they would actually read these amendments, many of their fears would be allayed. There's nothing here that says you can't make an addition to your house. All it says is, which is already the law, if it's more than 750 square feet, you have to get a special permit. And so I really don't know where this is coming from, but you know, the master plan, and you're all familiar with this, you've cited it several times tonight in the terms of mixed use, and putting that forward. But I've tabbed places in here where the master plan speaks of the necessity to preserve Arlington's residential neighborhoods and deal with the issues of tear downs and mansionization, and perhaps introduce an idea of FAR, Florida Area Ratio, with respect to new construction. And that's all in here, and this is the plan that you adopted, that you brought to town meeting and asked town meeting to endorse. And there's nothing in here, at least I couldn't find anything in here that says that it's important to the community to preserve the right of developers to build whatever they want, wherever they want. There's nothing in here that I could find that says it's important to the community that if someone's lived in the neighborhood for years or maybe decades, that they should have the opportunity to bail out at what they think is the top dollar, and without regard to what a replacement building might do to the rest of their neighbors they're leaving behind. And there is no mention of the fact that, or it is a fact, it's an implication, I think, that these smaller houses, the ones that are getting picked on, which might go for a few $100,000, and who knows if the developer is really going to pay the top price, because these houses never get on the market, are the types that maybe a a retiring couple or a young family could afford, not the $1 million boxes. So the master plan, you've asked, we spent a long time, you spent a long time, the master plan people spent a long time, and thousands, literally thousands of hours were spent, many of them in this room, developing this stuff. And if it means anything with respect to residential and the neighborhoods of Arlington, it means that we want to preserve them somewhat in the scale and style that they now exist. And if some people think that's a bad thing, well, I'm sorry for them. I think those of us who moved here, and I've only been here for like less than 50 years, so I'm a newcomer. But, you know, this is one of the things that brought us here. So I just wanted to say those few words in defense of what we're doing, and to say that the articles that you brought forward, and you say in your notice that the articles brought forward by the Redevelopment Board are those which begin the implementation of the master plan. What you don't mention is, with respect, the articles dealing with the residential end are baby steps in that implementation. What the citizens group has proposed are the kind of giant strides that we need at this point. For 56 teardowns of small, affordable houses have occurred to be replaced typically with large vinyl-clad boxes. That is something that we need to address. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Going forward, and thank you for bringing up the point that this has gotten a little bit off track. At the moment, we are just discussing Articles 8, 17, and 13. As we move on through our agenda this evening, there will be an opportunity to discuss specific articles, but I would ask that people keep their comments to those articles being discussed at the moment. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Carl Tamain. I'm an attorney in Lexington. I represent a number of Arlington residents that are here tonight. They've asked me to speak on their behalf. With regard to the definitions, unfortunately, it's not a simple matter. The definitions affect how the bylaw is interpreted and implemented. As the gentleman before me pointed out, he currently has a home where, with the existing definitions, he'd be able to put an additional story on his house for his family to live in and grow. If the definitions are passed as written, for example, where a basement now becomes a story, he would be prohibited from doing so in the future. And a number of homes in Arlington, and I would suggest a significant number of homes in Arlington, would become non-conforming structures. Almost every home in Arlington already is 2.5 stories. If their basement now becomes a story, their structure will be a 3.5-story dwelling, which is non-conforming. What's the implications of that? Well, they may have to go for a special permit to expand that non-conforming structure. One of the definitions expands what is included in the floor area ratio to include basements, garage areas. So those homes are now going to have to satisfy a larger open space requirement. One of the questions that my clients have is that open space requirement going to need to be contiguous? Right now, the 30% is required to be contiguous. To achieve a 40% open space contiguous area is going to be extremely difficult for a number of existing homes in Arlington. They can barely accommodate the 30% contiguous open space as it is.
We're not on that. We haven't had a chance to present that article yet.
Well, one of the definitions is for, again, I'm just addressing the definitions. I'm sorry?
We're not at that article yet. We're not discussing the open space article yet.
But what I'm addressing is the gross floor area definition, including additional floor areas that were not included previously. I'm just trying to show or argue that the definitions are significant. They're not just simple changes. They have wide-ranging effect, and I'll be happy to address each of those as the articles come up.
Thank you.
My name is June Rutkowski. I live at 128 Alpine Terrace, and I just wanted to address a few things. I'll be very brief, and I apologize if I'm not totally on the articles we're saying, because I find them very confusing, don't really understand them fully enough. But I did want to address a few things. One of the first gentlemen who got up to speak, a realtor from Lake Street, talked about Arlington turning into an elitist town if certain limitations are put in place. I would argue exactly the opposite, that these very, very large houses that go up are $1 million plus, and who can afford those but people who make a lot of money or are super highly educated or whatever. That seems to lean more elitist than putting some restrictions in place. To the gentleman who was speaking up about making a living, totally understand that. I don't think anybody wants to put anybody out of work. I don't understand if it's really true that one cannot make a living by building a slightly smaller house, a slightly lower house, a house that's maybe a little bit farther from the edges of the property, a house that has some trees, and what was the other thing? Anyway, that's about it for now, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Adam Oster. I live at 10 Cottage Avenue, which is in East Arlington, where the issue of some of these tear downs and also what is replacing them is of concern. In fact, I would say I've only been in town meeting for 10 years, but I can't remember when there have been so many citizen petition zoning articles, and it indicates the level of concern about that issue in particular. I also would say that the quid pro quo from the master plan process, which has probably elevated community interest in zoning and development issues, is that we want our growth to happen on the business corridors, but we want our neighborhoods to stay pretty much intact. That might not always be practical or possible, but I think it expresses a general expectation that a lot of people now have. Zoning and land use are highly technical, and when these come to town meeting, what I will be looking for from you and what I'm hoping to learn a little bit tonight is, are the proposed remedies allowed and would they be effective? And also, does the remedy unduly burden property owners? Unduly burden is not the same thing as would burden some people sometimes to some extent. And finally, I would like to say that if the ARB finds that these remedies are defective, I'd like to know how quickly ARB or the town will bring a corrected remedy to town meeting. And from my point of view, a special town meeting later this spring would not be too soon. I don't want us to have another building season go through where some of these very inappropriate buildings go up. And I'm not opposed to tear downs. I think they're necessary and beneficial sometimes, but there needs to be better preservation of the public good that is created by the sort of architectural harmony and the land use harmony of the neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Christopher Moore, 80 School Street, member of town meeting. I'm here mostly to learn in my role as a member of town meeting about these articles. One of the things that I think would be helpful is if the board, when it explains these things to town meeting, could be clear about what problem is trying to be solved. I think the mixed-use article is a good example of that being done. It's a little less clear in these more technical articles what exactly changing from 4 feet to 3'6" or whatever isn't really intended to accomplish. And in view of the potential burdens on some property owners that we've heard of in this meeting, it would be helpful to understand exactly what we're hoping to accomplish as a community by making these small but potentially impactful changes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nadine Elo. I'm at 143 Palmer Street. I first moved to Arlington in 2005 as a renter, and 5 years ago I became a homeowner. Last year I was married, and my husband and I want to start a family in Arlington. We are planning on putting dormers on the house and growing a family here. I don't fully understand the laws. They're not totally clear. I don't know what the floor space, floor gross plan is, and the impact the 4 and 6 inches to 3 and 6 inches is going to have on our current space. So I kind of feel like there needs to be clarity on that. But we want to stay in town. We want to grow our home and have a family here. And I'm confused as to whether we can do that now. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I remember what I wanted to say. Somebody said something about triple deckers, and somebody else said, oh, that's incorrect to make that kind of association. But when you have a drive-in garage, 1 floor, 2 floors, that looks like 3 floors on the street. Plus you got the big triangle on top. So that's where the triple decker thing comes in. The gentleman who read the letter about the older couple with the ranch that maybe they couldn't put a second floor on, is that really true? Is that what these limits are saying? I wouldn't think so. So I find that very strange. And can Arlington take some kind of leadership role in this whole crazy explosion of building like we see in Lexington? You go to the Burlington Mall, and it's a disaster. Can we take a leadership role in, you know, being an example for modest, healthy development? Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Jim Doherty, former member of the Arlington Board of Assessors for over 20 years. I would like to speak about something different, but having to do with gross floor area that you should really consider. A lot of what you're after, which I endorse, you know, whether it be the mixed-use things, which I did one, much to the chagrin of Mr. Loretti, would not have been built. Second of all, I would say this, as it relates, which is very, very important to this community, particularly as we're approaching a debt exclusion and override. Arlington for years has had one of the smallest amounts of new growth, which is, as many of you may know, the revenue that drives this community. every community gets 2.5% increase in their levy out of the gate. From there, it's a matter of how much new growth. Arlington has you need some water?
I got it.
I have a bottle.
I have water.
There you go. Arlington has very little new development. Obviously, the last couple of years might be different between Mill Street and Sims, but that's a little blip on the radar screen. The fact of the matter is, probably 90% of the revenue of new growth, which can be hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, comes from additions. Now, you guys all live in the community. Everybody here lives in the community. Go up anywhere near Dallin. Pick a side. If you want to go from the Lexington line all the way to the Belmont line, almost all the way down to Brackett School District. Start over here across the street and go up by Crosby School all the way up through Morningside till really you get northwest of Long Meadow Road. The fact of the matter is the gentleman who mentioned earlier said, those are all capes. They're very modest homes. The only way those people can expand if they have more people in the family, unless they want a little 2 bedrooms in the Cape, which they all have, is to be able to get 2 bedrooms, maybe 3. They already have 2 downstairs. We're not talking about a big explosion of population here. We're talking in many cases the same amount of bedrooms. We're talking functional area and very limited increase in the story heights. Mr. Warden, I have known for years. I've had the pleasure of living near him for years. Up on Brantwood Road. He lived on Brantwood Road and then moved to Kensington Road or Park? I think you lived on Kensington once before you went to Kensington Road. Thank you. I know you just shot me. The fact of the matter is this. I lived in a very modest Cape that was moved from Route 2 when it was put through, that my parents, where my mother still lives, converted to a colonial. The increase in height was very marginal. Mr. Warden, God bless him, lived in 2 extraordinary large houses up there, and one I will give him credit for, I believe deeded off a piece of property, a large piece of property next to it, and donated it so it would never be built on, which is marvelous. More people should do that. It's a wonderful thing. I lived on Lincoln Street, where another member of your board, Mr. West, lives, I believe, and I lived in a very large house over there.
Can we keep this on track, sir?
Yeah, I'm trying to explain the fact that in one respect we have a revenue issue, and in another respect we have a little hypocrisy here, where people live in, Mr. Warden currently lives in an extremely large house.
And let's not.
I'm not making it personal, it's a fact. We have to know where motivations. I complimented the gentleman, didn't I?
Stop.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I finish?
You may.
Thank you. So the fact of the matter is, everybody has motivations in life, okay? And the fact of the matter of this is that the result of these personal feelings are not necessarily in harmony with property owners' rights. And you should seriously consider it, one, from an equity standpoint, and you should seriously consider it from a monetary standpoint. Thank you for your time. I hope I didn't take up as much as some of the previous speakers.
Any further public comment on Articles 8, 13, or 17? Mr. Chair.
I think one of the important things for me as we kind of go through here is the master plan. The master plan has done what certain people have talked about, which is talk about the neighborhoods and the different things that are happening in the neighborhood with respect to building, et cetera. And it did put the wishes of the town in there with respect to trying to manage some of that development. And I think the good news is that the Master Plan Implementation Committee has spent a whole lot of time on this. And they've put in a ton of effort on it. And as everyone knows, we went through a 2-year process on the master plan itself. Now we've gone another year. And the Master Plan Implementation Committee has made recommendations to this board, which are included in Article 7 that we're talking about. Is it 7? 8, sorry, 8. I'm losing track here. So from my perspective, I look at those changes and I understand they will change what some folks can do. I do understand that. But it is part of the master plan to kind of move some of these things forward. Now, with respect to Articles 13 and 17, did I get that right? So with respect to Articles 13 and 17, from my perspective, what I would have liked to have seen is work through the implementation committee on some of these as well. I don't think that's what was done. So from where I'm sitting, I've gone over the different proposals and heard all of the different discussion and everything else. While I appreciate what the citizens have brought forth on 13 to 17, I will say that the implementation committee's view of the matter kind of resonates with me, and so from that perspective, I expect to be supporting Article 8 and probably not supporting 13 and 17. So, but on a global scale, that's important to me, is the work that the implementation committee did, the public meetings that they had with respect to that, and having an open process with respect to that.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Ward.
May I ask the implementation committee gentlemen to address what work they did on considering Articles 13 and 17?
Yeah, sorry, but I think
that's outside of the scope of this discussion.
And beyond that, it went the other way around. When they went through their whole process, they brought these articles to us. So Articles 8 through 11 through 11, 10 through 11, 8, 9, 10. Yeah. 8, 11.
No, you're right. 9 and 10.
No, 8, 9, 10.
10.
Okay.
Ken.
Well, I just want to address one of the speakers here earlier, actually what Article 8 is, that I'm very much for. And the intent of the zoning was 2.5 stories. And there have been in the past where if you were below a certain height, it doesn't count as a story. So it's been a loophole. We're just trying to close that loophole down to follow more of the zoning. So that's the minor change that we're doing in Article 8. It's falling more in line with what the state and whatever everybody else is doing as far as what is counted as a story. Now, addressing it by saying if we make a few more changes by 4 or 5 inches or whatever, you do not have the ability to add another floor. Well, that's the case of zoning. You have 2.5 stories you're zoned for. What you're asking for is a loophole to get out of that 2.5 stories and build more. That's what we're trying to be fair with. So that's my read on what Article 8 is, and just trying to be fair and have an understanding what the intent of the zoning was for. We're not trying to change or minimize square footages, minimize your allowable floors. We're following the intent of what the zoning is, just making it clearer to fall in line with what the state's doing. Now, as far as Article 13 and Article 17, I too will follow Mike here and not really support it. I think it's a little too aggressive. I think it goes a little too far out right now as far as changing what the intent is. I'll give one example, and I think we should talk about this, but counting screened-in porches. as an example of counting it as floor area. Well, if you count it as floor area, then most people building new houses will no longer build porches. They'll just build whatever house that they can to get the rooms in. That changes the character of the buildings that we're going to see. So I just want to make sure that we don't make these wholehearted changes for good reasons. I'm not saying these are not for good reasons. I support them. I think that the reasons are really valid. But what comes from it is maybe not exactly what you want intended. You know, I think having streets with lined porches that people can sit out and enjoy is something that what Arlington's about. But if you start counting these porches as screened-in areas, then you're not going to build them, because who would build them if you can't realize the value of that? In lieu of a porch, you get a bedroom. It takes away some of the character that we're trying to preserve. And that's where I think we should visit that and look at what some of these intents are of being too aggressive with what we're trying to do. I think the thought and the process of minimizing these big houses are very noble, and I think it's a great idea. But let's take it in moderation and be fair to everybody that's involved.
Thank you. Andy?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to kind of understand the big picture of the articles that we've been looking at. We're just talking about 8, and then 13 and 17 relate to that, but the ARB introduced articles are pretty light touch attempts to limit these out of scale developments. It's not stopping you from building an addition. And I think that we've worked hard to kind of make them a baby step in a way. What I would like to do is understand myself a little bit more about Articles 13 and 17 and others that potentially could be merged into our thinking. We may not have had enough time personally to understand how those relate. Because I'm hearing that, you know, for instance, including a garage, that's a pretty big step. Including that in gross floor area, that's a pretty big limitation. So I think that's where I am coming down on this. I think it might be helpful, Ted, if you want to mention that fellow got up and said, what does this all mean? Each one of them has, in a way, to Article 8 to slightly adjust the height of the building by going from 4'6" to 3'6", and to encourage there to be a more scaled roof rather than a big flat high roof. We want to make sure these don't affect the building industry or that kind of thing, but at the same time, you know, don't hurt the neighborhood. Don't hurt what we like about the neighborhood. Whether it's a big house neighborhood or a little house neighborhood or in between. So I think I'd like to know a little bit more about how to merge some of the later articles into the ones that we're proposing 8 through 10.
I think that's a discussion that can be had outside this meeting. As far as Article 8 goes, I think it is a baby step. And I think what we need are baby steps. Wholesale changes do run the risk of...
Use the mic, please.
Wholesale changes would have the potential to affect entire neighborhoods in a way that we don't necessarily want to see. I think there's a debate that can go on for years over this. We've had it several times. We've talked this issue over and over, and it's how do you put these controls in? And it's okay. We would never say let's do something like have a moratorium on tear downs. I think that goes far too far. Here we're inserting these very small incremental changes to try to reflect what the people who participated in the master plan discussion have had. But also keep in mind that the people that live here are also the people that work here. I certainly don't want to have them put out of business, and that's not the intent of any of the board's articles. This is simply to be responsive to the wishes of the people who participated in that process and who voted in that process. The Master Plan Implementation Committee has done a very thorough job over the now 3 years since this process began, first as the research committee and now as the implementation committee, and I respect what they say, and I think that Article 8 is good. As far as the other 2 articles going further, I'm not sure that I can support those at this time, but like Andy said, I think there may be room for some compromise down the road. Thank you. Article 9.
Article 9 is another incremental approach to controlling the size of new development in Arlington. Yes, it did come from the master planning process where participants said they wanted to see the new growth in Arlington concentrated along the commercial corridors and to protect the neighborhoods. This change will, it's a fairly simple change. It will change the percentage of the lot that must be open space, which in turn affects how much building there can be. The open space requirement is tied to the gross floor area of a structure. So right now it's 30% of the gross floor area has to be usable open space, and we are proposing to increase that to 40% of gross floor area for open space. So it has the effect of controlling the amount of a new area that can be built, because if you don't have enough open space on your lot, you can't build as big an addition. And with new construction, it requires that there be 40% of the area of the home must be open space, usable open space.
Public comments. Sorry, yes, sir.
Adam Schoen, 93 Madison Avenue. I think this requirement goes further than a modest change, because at least when I read it, usable open space is the percentage, but also can't have a horizontal dimension in any direction less than 25 feet. So really, we're talking about it has to be a property that has a area to draw a massive rectangle on it. And for, I think, pretty much any property less than 7,000 square feet or so, that becomes almost impossible to do. My family is essentially the Chamberlain family also. My wife and I have been here 15 years. We were renters. We never thought we could afford to live in Arlington. The bubble burst a little, property prices came down, we were able to buy. We have been saving money because we wanted to put an addition on our house, essentially for their reason. We bought a smaller, modest house. We wanted to put a living room on because we didn't have kids when we bought it, and didn't realize that as they grow, they want a lot and need a lot more space. They don't want to be on top of their parents. Turns out their parents don't necessarily want to be on top of them either, so that there could be a little space there. And under something like this, where we have a property where, yeah, we'd meet 40% and have 30%, but not when it's tied with having the requirement that you can't have a dimension less than 25. Because my house is a rectangle, my lot's a rectangle, and with the setbacks, I've got a good front yard, good side yards, good backyards, but there's only one place on my property that meets this requirement when you have the 25-foot length or horizontal dimension along with the total percentage. It essentially becomes impossible to do any change to my property, even though I'd meet whatever you want to call the amount of open space on my property that's usable. It's got a big side yard with a porch, I've got a front yard and stuff like that, but each dimension's a 16 foot or 18 feet. There's only one spot where I could do it. I think there are a lot of families in Arlington like that. A lot of the neighborhoods up where we live, I think, are like that. There are a lot of young families like that who want to stay here. We don't want to tear our houses down. We don't want to have to go to another community. We're in the public schools. We love it here. It turned out our first landlord was our kids' kindergarten teacher, and that was really cool. And we just want to raise our family here and be able to put a living room on our house, just like the Chamberlains, just like a lot of families we know who were at Pierce were looking for ways to stay here by making what we think are modest additions, but apparently now, based on the recommendation of Article 8, would not be considered a modest addition. It would be considered a major change, because we just don't have any other area on our property to put a little living room, even if we met all the setback requirements, which we would with what we were talking about. And I think there are a lot of families in that position that at maybe the time all of this was being discussed, and I don't want to neglect all the hard work that went into it, but I was a naive young family. I didn't even recognize that this would be something I would be talking about one day. I was just trying to get kids to bed at like 7 at night and get us up and out the door and get to work on time. And that's what Arlington provides for us, because I have to get into the city to work. I can do that reasonably. I can get home before 7 and put my kids to sleep, which is very important to me. I don't want to move further away where that now becomes impossible. And a lot of the families I talk about who are at the schools here, this is all of our concern, and some of them couldn't get here tonight because they couldn't get babysitters. So we're here, and my wife's at the other meeting, and we had to spend $100 just to do this tonight and find, luckily, a teenager in our neighborhood that could come babysit our kids. But it's very important to us, and I think it's very important to young families that want to stay in this town. Thank you.
Carl Tamayan. As I alluded to earlier, by changing the definition of what is included in calculating the gross floor area, you've already increased the open space requirement. Now, by increasing it from 30% to 40%, you're compounding that requirement. As the gentleman just mentioned, it's very difficult for existing homeowners to even meet the 30% open space requirement because of the contiguous nature that's required. If you now require a 40% open space contiguous area, it's going to be impossible to make for a majority of homes. And if they're non-conforming, Article 9, Section 9.02D prohibits a special permit, because it states, so you can receive a special permit provided it does not increase any open space nonconformities. So if they already don't conform with the 25-foot contiguous area, the 40% is just going to make that worse. They won't be entitled to get a special permit because they're a non-conforming structure. I think the problem is if you change the definitions and then you change the open space percentage, it's going to prohibit anybody or a majority of people in town from putting on an addition to their home. And a lot of people have purchased homes in Arlington with the expectation that they'd be able to add on in the future.
Thank you.
Good evening, Christian Klein, 54 Newport Street. When the board is addressing their comments at the end, if they could address the two different definitions for open space, that there's landscaped open space and usable open space, and their approach to only affecting the usable open space and not addressing landscaped open space. Thank you.
Could you address that now?
You're saying, why aren't we increasing the landscape open space requirement?
I'm just curious as to why it's essentially why it's only addressing the open space question when there's the usable open space question, which is it's a very difficult standard to meet in Arlington as opposed to in some other jurisdictions. Whereas the landscaped open space is a considerably smaller percentage. Mm-hmm. It seems kind of odd that number is so little of your yard has to be landscaped, but you have to have a very large portion of your land available that's not allowed to include things such as driveways, et cetera. I'm just curious about the board's approach to this question.
I think the difference, like if we had increased the amount of open space that needed to be landscaped, that might improve the appearance of yards, but it wouldn't do anything to control the size of the house. And this was a modest attempt to put a little bit of control on the size of new development. That was the intent of this article.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Loretti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Loretti, 56 Adams Street. I mentioned Adams Street because if anyone knows where that is, it's in East Arlington. I have a fairly typical lot that's less than 5,000 square feet, 4,950 to be exact. And I mention that because I appreciate the comments of the first two speakers, but I think they're completely wrong. One of the things you always do when you see zoning proposals put forth is to say, how's it going to affect me? And so I decided to do that, both looking at this 40% number for the usable open space, looking at the inclusion of my basement in the floor area calculation, looking at half of the third floor as floor area without any exceptions, and lo and behold, I meet the 40% requirement. It's not difficult to meet. The hardest thing to meet for most houses or yards with that 40% requirement is having this 25% dimension. And it's not a rectangle, it's a circle that the building inspector will draw on the plans to be sure you meet that. But once you meet it, getting the rest of the area outside of that circle to meet that, the total usable open space requirement really isn't that hard. The only time it may be an issue for people in East Arlington is if they want to add a lot of square footage to their house and also have a large garage on the site. And frankly, I've seen cases where the garage, which most people don't use anyway except for storing junk, comes down so the house can get bigger. Frankly, I think that's a fair trade-off. Well, I'll leave it at that. But I think, you know, I don't think the tales of gloom and doom are really accurate. I do support this change. And I would just end by saying I'd like to remind the board that zoning changes are the purview of the planning board, which is your board. I appreciate the interest of the Master Plan Advisory Committee, but frankly, I have not seen them be very active or involved with your board as these changes have come forward. And I think people here need to understand that it's largely been the staff in the planning department that are responsible for the changes that the ARB has considered as the ARB zoning changes. And I think we owe them a debt of gratitude for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe.
Excuse me. Hi, Joe Barr, Park Street in East Arlington, and the co-chair of the recently mentioned Master Plan Implementation Committee. I guess I'll just say two things. One, on behalf of the committee, I would just second to some extent what Laura mentioned in terms of this being an attempt at a modest change to control the size and bulk of residential units. I'll just remind people it's only R0, R1, and R2 in terms of the impact. And I think that, you know, we did have a long discussion about this in our meetings and whether the 40% was the appropriate number. And I think we do want to make sure, our intent certainly was to make sure that this wasn't a huge impact. And so I guess I would just say that if the further analysis or further discussion shows that it is in fact there is something unintended happening here, then perhaps we should consider whether 40% is the right number. But I think we felt it was the right number. And I guess I'll just for the honor of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, I will say that you can ask my wife as to whether we spent a lot of time and my son on this on these meetings. I certainly feel like we have. We've engaged, I think, actually very successfully with the ARB to support what we're looking to do, and have them support what we're looking to do. And the staff have been extremely helpful, but I think we have put in a lot of time to discuss these, to think about these, and to move these from what was in the master plan to what you see before you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Jonathan Nyberg, 129 Lake Street, Arlington. Just following up the previous gentleman's statement, I think, as you've stated, and I respect and really appreciate it, doing some smaller steps, going towards bigger steps, etc. But going from 30 to 40%, that's a 33% increase. It's not just, that's not really a little step. If you look at the big picture, it's a fairly good sized step. So maybe we could compromise 35%, or maybe it could be something that over time, in the next 10 years, it ramped up a certain percentage. But I think it's, anyway, I think I would disagree. I think the 30% is working for most people in Arlington. I also think too, Arlington, we have a lot of different areas. We're not urban, we're not suburban. I call us suburban. And I think part of being a suburban community is we have the flexibility of meeting different people's demands. And as most of us that watch HGTV or any of those other shows, people do want more space. They want to be able to breathe, but they also want to be close to town and livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment on Article 9? Mike.
A couple things, I guess. The first one is, and I think this is very important, we haven't changed that 25 feet. So you need that contiguous 25 feet, whether it's 30% or 40%. So that's an important point here. If you didn't have the 25 feet before, you don't have it now. So we're really not taking any of that away. So I want to be very clear on that particular point. Second point, with respect to staff's work on this and everything else, we owe a huge debt of gratitude, and I didn't mean to, in my earlier comments, denigrate anything that certainly the assistant director has done as the acting director for the past few months. Laura's done an amazing job and we have every confidence in Jenny and Laura moving forward with all of this and more. So we really appreciate that. The other half of that is the Master Plan Implementation Committee did an amazing amount of work. And not only that, but they did present to us at every meeting that we had on this. There were representatives at every single meeting telling us what their discussions were and everything else. So that can't be you know, we need to recognize that as well. So given the fact that the 25 feet doesn't change or anything else, I do think it's worth certainly a discussion at town meeting to put this forward and to have the discussion on, you know, this as a step on the master plan implementation. I think these are, this is a step. I think it's not as big as some of those others that have been put forth. I guess I'm not necessarily of the mind that this is the first step. I actually think this is a good step. And from my perspective, I'm okay with this as is. I don't look at it as a baby step to be followed by another baby step, et cetera. I mean, I think these are good changes. I think as we go and do some more implementation, that zoning could change a little bit in how we do it. And that might affect this. But this in and of itself, I think is a change worth debating in front of town meeting and bringing forward. So that's my view on this one.
Thank you. Ken?
I also agree with Mike, and want to thank everybody that's worked on this. I believe this has been quite a bit of work on this. If some of you guys have went to some of the previous meetings, we have had quite a few diagrams showing lot lines, building lines, open space, what are the setback requirements, and we actually debated this back and forth quite a bit, and it was quite a bit of a give and take on some of these issues. Once again, I think this is a fair compromise. Keep in mind that this increase from 30 to 40% the ARB is supporting is not, well, let's say I am supporting, is not tied in with increasing what's counted as floor area. You know, that might still be up to debate, but this step alone is keeping the floor area similar to what we had before, just that we're increasing the open space requirement so that there's a little more space between what's being built. That's all the intent of this is for. It's not to diminish or make houses smaller, it's just to give you a little bit more room between newer buildings.
Andy?
And I just second what you're saying, Ken. It's for the R0, R1, and R2 districts. We looked at it carefully in diagram. I think it's still in process to help us put those together to see how they actually affect the footprint of the house on the site. And we would keep a close eye on it as we approach town meeting, but I support this.
Thank you. This is one area where I step back from my colleagues a little bit. I don't think I can fully support this with the 40% requirement. I think 30% has worked. I think there might be a compromise to be made, but I think 40% is too much. I think it decreases too much of what can be built. I think it's a little bit overly restrictive, and I don't think I'd be inclined to support this as is. But I do want to echo what my colleagues have said. The Master Plan Implementation Committee staff, the members of this board, have all worked for hours and hours and spent late nights and early mornings trying to get here and be ready for tonight. We owe them all a debt of gratitude and a huge amount of thanks. Thank you. Moving on to Article 10.
This is the final article proposed by the Redevelopment Board for town meetings consideration. One of the things that came up repeatedly in the master planning process was the two garage doors somewhat underground, but in the front of new houses being built. And so we are proposing two things to mitigate these impacts. One is to limit the slope between the sidewalk and the garage door to 15%. Right now, some of them are very steep, which I think that there have been some drainage issues that have arisen, but limiting the slope to 15% may cause some of the houses to move back a little bit from the lot lines so that the garage doors are not as close to the sidewalk. And then the other change we're proposing is, right now the bylaw allows one 20-foot driveway or a 10-foot driveway, but in order to have two 10-foot driveways, you need a special permit. We're proposing to allow two 10-foot driveways by right. It's no wider than one 20-foot driveway, but would allow developers or builders to put the two driveways, one on each side of the lot, and so they would be able to provide the parking for the home without having to go under and put it right in the front.
Public comment.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Pyle. I live at 66 Gloucester Street. I'm here to say that I think that the 15% grade is a smart idea in this provision, and I support it. But I am very concerned about the unintended consequences of allowing two driveways by right in existing areas where there's two-family houses. I live on Gloucester Street. It's almost the whole street is two-family houses, and you have the situation where there's a driveway, the house, and then a little strip on the other side of the house that is grassed. I could easily see people coming in and without any consultation with their neighbors, putting in a second driveway on that grassy bit and causing drainage issues to flow onto the neighboring property, particularly where the properties are so close together. And this is not limited to new construction. That may have been the intent, but that's not the way it reads. Also, there's no requirement for a grassy or vegetated buffer between the edge of this driveway and the neighboring property. Right now, it could go to the lot line. And you are putting a situation where somebody could come home and find a driveway where there wasn't one before without any comment, and it's not that onerous to go get a special permit for a second driveway from the zoning board, and that would at least alert the neighbors, and drainage impacts can be dealt with before there's any actual paving, and you put the onus on the abutter to bring a nuisance action and incur that expense. Also, we don't want a situation where we have pavement after pavement after pavement. That is not in keeping with the traditional streetscape as is endorsed by the master plan. So although I would support the 15% grade change, I don't think that allowing a second driveway by right in all of the residential districts really gets at what you're talking about without some modification, and even in terms of a special permit where everybody gets notice and can comment, or a vegetated strip. I know the chair mentioned previously that in, I think it was Waltham, they allow a vegetative strip. That might go toward alleviating some drainage concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Klein.
I also wanted to reiterate a couple of the comments that the previous speaker made. In an R2 district where the required side yard setback is only 10 feet, allowing 10 feet of pavement on either side of a building essentially eliminates any chance of having vegetation on the sides of the houses, which I think is a dangerous precedent to set.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple other comments. The other issue that a problem this causes, and particularly I'm thinking again in East Arlington, where there is a lot of people use the street for parking. Every time you add a curb cut, you eliminate on-street parking, and at least one space, possibly more, depending on how the spaces fit across, between the existing driveway curb cuts. The other thing you're doing is, it's my understanding that the town maintains the apron on the driveways, so you're adding to the town's maintenance burden for those aprons, because those are town-maintained property. On the specific language of the bylaw change, you're actually expanding this just from one single, two-family, duplex, and three-family houses to any type of use within the R0 through R4 districts. So even if you have a non-residential use, you are allowing, potentially by right, businesses that may be in those residential districts or other uses, non-residential uses, to also put in driveways. And if this is going to go forward, I think you really have to go back to what the original language was in terms of those types of residences, and you have to have at least a 5-foot strip. The other potential problem with this is there doesn't seem to be any limitation on where that driveway goes. Does it go all the way back to the rear, property line limit? And then do you have another parking, more parking spaces in the backyard? I'm not sure whether you can have a second garage as a second accessory structure or not, but I think that's also something else you need to look at. My suggestion would be to keep this as a special permit condition, but perhaps work with the ZBA on more clear guidance on when they would grant a special permit and when they wouldn't. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Barr.
So just to provide a quick perspective, from the implementation committee, I would say that particularly the second driveway provision is something that was actually we added after discussions in response to a previous public hearing, I want to say in January, if I'm remembering correctly. So this was actually something where we had heard concerns about the other changes and what impact they might have, and the idea that perhaps driveways on the side of a structure rather than in the middle, either into the ground level or below grade, were of concern to people. So we were trying to find a sort of happy medium. I think we felt like, it may not be true in every case, but basically 2 10-foot driveways more or less the same as 1 20-foot driveway. I realize that, like I said, that doesn't always work out quite exactly the way you might expect, but sort of on average it should. So hopefully the drainage, maintenance, kind of number of parking space issues kind of wash out in the end, although again, like they said, your experience may vary. But we're hopeful that this was something that could accommodate some needs that were expressed. But again, I think this was not something that was, certainly could be subject to some adjustment based on additional comment that was received. I think the 15% grade one was something we felt was important, both from a safety perspective in terms of visibility, people coming in and out of the driveway, and it would also have a mild impact on the bulk of houses that might be helpful.
Thank you.
Hi, Michael Beck, 6 Adamian Park. The more and more I listen to the comments here, I see this as a 2 Arlington issue. It's an East Arlington issue that's flat, and then the valley with hills on the left and the right as you go west. When I read this and thought of the 15% slope, though I grew up in East Arlington, now live in the hills, I thought of the slope going up to the driveways, such as on Ridge Street, for instance. Or today when I came home from work, I drove down School Street. And if you think of Robbins, School, Monotony, those houses, which are the type of houses I want to preserve in Arlington, would not be built with the new laws you're proposing. The 12% grade, the 15% grade in those driveways is there. All the basements to the previous Article 8 would be non-conforming. So I just want to make the point that you may want to consider an East R0, East R1 with this, because you're trying to solve a topological issue here. And I know, I only knew about this because a neighbor of mine said, you should go to this, it affects your house. And someone else mentioned it. But I'm probably one of 20,000 units in Arlington. There are 20,000 units, and I know the board has done a lot of work, but if you haven't gone and inventoried those units, it's going to probably affect thousands. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Mike?
Good points on the driveways. I'm not sure exactly my thoughts on that, so I'll move it over to Ken.
Well, let me step back a little bit and answer a little earlier question about the 2 driveway versus the 1 driveway. I think the intent was for this to happen in areas where there's 2 families to 3 families, not a single family area, where it gives the ability to split up a little bit the scale of the driveways. Instead of having in a 2-family lot having a 20-foot wide driveway, it's broken down into smaller 10-foot driveways, which brings the scale of the neighborhood down a little bit. The amount of curb and amount of driveway, curb cut is the same. 10 and 10 is 20 or 20. It's pretty much the same. As far as sort of waking up the next morning and finding a driveway spilling water into your lot, that can't happen. You're not allowed to build a driveway 20 foot or 10 foot that spills water onto your neighbor's lot. That just doesn't work, okay? That might be existing, but not new. And that's what we're talking about, okay? And then I think what we're trying to do is keep the ability to scale things down a little bit. And we looked at a little bit about the 50% slope, and you do bring up a good point about some of the neighborhoods that on the hills that just make it very difficult to achieve. And I think we should look at that a little bit more. Okay. Not going to say I'm going to wholeheartedly support that, but I think we should look at that. But the intent of what that was for was to make these outrageous, you see these homes where you just shoot right up into the parking garage, you shoot right down to the parking because you have the ability to squeeze the stuff in. And that's what we're trying to move away from. We're not trying to move away from the character of what some of the older houses that have the steeper driveways. And that's a concern that we should look into. And I'm not sure where we can go and how to solve that right now. And I think Mike had the same issue, wanting to defer a little bit, to see what that is. I'm not sure what you want to say, Andy, here on this part.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think the good points were made. I think that at least by special permit, I am worried about multiple curb cuts. And if we don't know what the condition is that we're looking at, because there's a whole range of kind of things, that worries me, because just curb cut per se is going to affect the streetscape. The comment about what?
Trees, too.
The trees, yeah. So you put a curb cut in, it's gonna. So I would say that was a good point about at least making that a special permit condition. The 15%, and tell me if I'm mistaken on this, planning board, was also to stop. It actually pushes the house back because it stops you from starting a very steep slope of 20% or 15% or more, and then getting use of that, pulling that house up close to the property line and getting use of that lower level by basically digging out. So it was another way of potentially decreasing the house size or decreasing the lot building size by pushing that 15% as the maximum. So it had a secondary idea in there. Not only to stop the idea that if you kind of imagine walking along, you fall in, you get back out. Just not only that, but to push the house back and therefore decrease its size on the lot. So I think I'd definitely go for the special permit, and I think it's worth talking a little bit more about this effect of the 15%.
That's true. That was one of the intents here. I think the other intent of this article was to push back against these 2 families that we see a lot in town, where you have a very steep driveway angle and then a giant gaping underground garage. The idea being that if we can put a driveway on either side of the property, you still have the same amount of asphalt space on the front of the house, but it's split up. But then there's no need to go down to have those giant garages.
That was
which-
right.
Which is just kind of as much of an issue in town as that. And for that reason, I do support this one. At this time, we have finished with the articles proposed by the Arlington Redevelopment Board, and we will now vote on Articles 6 through 10. Beginning with Article 6, and these votes are to recommend action or no action in front of town meeting. So, beginning with
Could you all just please remember to speak up? It's very difficult for you.
Sure. At this time, we're going to vote on the ARB proposals, beginning with Article 6.
I think before we do that, I'd like to talk about two things.
Sure.
Number one sorry, I'd like to talk about two things. Number one is there, as I mentioned in my comments with respect to the open space, I think it is good to move something forward in respect to the master plan and the intent of the master plan into town meeting. I do think it would be better for this board to have unanimity if we can do it. So my question to you, Mr. Chair, is can you get behind a 35%?
I can get behind the tool here. It's the percentage that I'm not completely comfortable.
I know,
with.
and
So I
that's
think
why
35% is something that I could support. And I did think about this in the meantime, and I think putting it in front of town meeting for further discussion and debate is wise.
And I do too, and I think it makes my own personal view more sense for us to try to do that from a 4-0 perspective than a 3-1 perspective.
I agree with that.
And for me, as I want to move it into town meeting, and then folks can amend and discuss it to their heart's content what that number should be, I would suggest, and I'd like to hear from my other board members, that we amend that from 40% open space down to 35% open space. But I'll leave it to, that would be my suggestion.
Ken?
Yeah, I can get on board with that. Yes, I can get on board with that. I think that is a fair compromise. I agree with you, having a 4-0 vote is a strong message, and I think I can agree with that.
Likewise, I'll go for 35.
Okay. So
What about the Article 9?
So that's
Article 9.
That's on Article 9. So on Article 10, I guess I would suggest, I must admit, given the fact that the person who was talking before already has a non-conforming use as far as slope is concerned, I'm a little less concerned about, actually, I think that one makes sense to me to move forward. I am of two minds on the 10 feet buffer. I think to some extent, it just is, it's not clear cut what the ramifications of that could be to existing yards and existing dwellings. I actually know Gloucester Street. I walk down that way, so I understand the concern there. And I think that if we just don't do anything to that particular paragraph, frankly, I think we might actually be in better shape. I understand the concern with the drop down into the big garage with one big driveway. However, I think if we put the 15% slope there, we can at least address a little bit of that. Obviously, you'll still have a 20-foot driveway. And, I'd suggest to anyone who's building out there, build nice houses, so that people might want to look at. But anyway, we're not an HOA here. So, from my perspective, I would actually suggest that we lose the two driveways, we keep the 15% in Article 10.
I think that's a change I could support. I know previous discussions of this article have included.
We've gone both ways.
We've gone both ways, but I think we've also expressed concern here. We've also talked about potentially fleshing this out a little bit further. We've also talked about fleshing this out a little bit further, requiring setbacks, requiring landscaping, and without that, I think that I think the benefits are outweighed by the negatives here, so I think I would remove that. Ken?
I would tend to agree, yes.
Andy?
I would agree. I was going to say by special permit, but I would take it out.
It is right now by special permit. You can have a second driveway by special
Oh,
permit now.
Oh, I didn't realize that, based on.
No. Oh, it is, but, okay.
So there would be no change. to what you're proposing.
Except for the grade.
Except for the grade, yes.
So it's already allowed by special permit.
Second driveway.
This would have done it by right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, then yes, I agree with
Okay.
eliminating it.
Okay, so that's on Article 10.
Okay.
Can I make one comment about Article 6?
Yes.
You may.
There's something in here that I think was a mistake and was not what you had intended. On the definition of step backs,
Yes.
it's as written in here, it says at the third story, and I think what we meant to say was after the third story, or at the fourth story.
At the fourth story.
That it be stepped back.
I think that's
That is
an
what.
accurate reflection. of
Yes,
what we
that's what we've talked about.
Yes, and would you be comfortable if we removed the feet requirement and just said at the fourth story? It said, right, what it says in what you're looking at, it says beginning at the third story level or 30 feet above grade, whichever is less. Page 11.
Page 11?
Section 6.285.
I would say so.
Yeah, so just say, starting at the fourth story,
Setback.
step back.
Step back.
Yes.
Step
Yes.
back.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Oh, there it is.
I think that's what we had discussed previously,
It
and I
was.
think
Yes.
it didn't get changed.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Laura.
Okay, so I will move to approve Article 6 as amended by that change that Laura just went through. I'm sorry, to recommend
recommend to
Article
town meeting.
6 to town meeting as set forth in the proposed vote in this document, whatever it is we're calling it, with the amendment as discussed right now.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Article 7, parking.
I'll
Mixed-use parking.
move to approve the recommendation of the recommended vote on Article 7. That's straight up as set forth in the document we've got in front of us.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Article 8, residential zoning changes definitions.
Article 8, I move to approve the recommended, as the recommended vote, the proposed vote set forth in our document in front of us for Article 8.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Article 9, residential
Okay.
changes dimensions as amended.
Right. On Article 9, to approve the recommendation of the proposed vote as set forth with the change of 40% down to 35%. So I guess that's the only change, actually. 35% in all three places.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Article 10, residential zoning changes parking.
Okay, Article 10, I move to approve, as the recommended vote of the Arlington Redevelopment Board, Article 10 as set forth in the document, only as to Section 8.07A. So only in respect of 8.07A. So we're not making the change to 8.07B, just 8.07A.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Moving on to those articles proposed by registered voters. First up is Article 11, garage entrance location. This was inserted at the request of Winnell Evans and 10 registered voters.
Chairman, I move that Article 15 be taken out of order.
You may. Mr. Ward.
Thank you. I didn't select the order in which these articles were put in the warrant. I don't know how they do it.
Neither did we.
Yeah. We'd have them in the 50s if we had our say.
Well, they used to be. It was somebody's bright idea to move zoning to the front of the warrant because the redevelopment board always had its act together.
We can change that.
Working on it.
Well, Article 15 would change the bylaw that we presently have that was enacted many years ago governing large residential additions, which is defined as more than 750 square feet. 750 square feet is a pretty large slice of geography, actually. I don't know, it's hard to visualize. This room is obviously more than that, but it's pretty good sized room or several rooms. And this was put in because people were putting in extraordinarily large additions and really changing the neighborhood. And this was way back in the 70s, I think, maybe early 80s. Unfortunately, at some point subsequent to that, a very large loophole was put into the middle of this section, a loophole large enough to drive a house through, actually. And that was that you didn't have to get the special permit if you were building on the same foundation. And I think this was probably put in with the idea if somebody's house burns down, of course they should be able to rebuild it if they get the insurance money. And they shouldn't have to go through a process to do that, and fair enough. But as a practical matter, the house didn't burn down. The little cape with its attached, with its porch sitting on cement blocks and its little garage on a slab, suddenly all those things became the foundation, and this huge house grew up, similar to the one that, say, Mr. Nyberg company was selling up in Clyde Terrace or into Washington Street. I'm not exactly sure where the division is. That exception has been gone beyond what was, I believe, originally intended. So basically, so the proposal that we lay before you is exactly actually what's in the warrant, and it does really three things. One is it gets rid of that exception that I was just discussing. Two is it defines addition or alteration to include reconstruction or replacement. And the third thing is it picks up all additions cumulatively for 5 years rather than the present 2 years. And the people should understand that we're not putting anybody out of business. We're not saying you can't build a large house. We're not saying you can't build an ugly house. What we are saying is the house preferably should be, and that's the intent of all the articles the citizens put forward, should be sort of sized to the lot. It should not overwhelm its neighbors. And in this case, if you're building a whole new house, the neighborhood, the people who are living there, who are staying there, who have invested there, they should have a say about what's going on. And they don't have a veto power, but everybody goes before the zoning board and they make their case, and the zoning board can then deal with the situation in a way that is fair to the the developer and fair to the neighborhood. Now, it doesn't going to prevent people from putting a second story on their ranch if they want to do that, or adding a whatever wants to do, a larger kitchen out the back or something like that. It's just to basically give people a voice in the process which affects their neighborhood, where they live, pay taxes, etc. So that really is that's the purpose of this, and we think it's important for the town, and it's important for our people of Arlington. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comments? Yes, sir.
Carl Tamayan. In my opinion, this proposal obviates zoning. The rationale is there's a foundation. An individual should be able to build or construct a house in compliance with whatever the required zoning requirements are. There are setback requirements, there are height requirements, there are FAR requirements, there are open space requirements. We're now introducing a special permit process to the zoning, what's permitted as of right under zoning. If it's a foundation, they should be able to build what the zoning bylaw allows them to build as of right. The whole concept of the additional large addition is when you're adding on to an existing structure. If a structure's been removed, they should be able to build what was there or what is permitted by zoning.
My name is, again, Elizabeth Pyle. I live at 66 Gloucester Street. I am very much in favor of this position and adding a reconstruction and a special permit requirement for that in Article 15. And I can speak to it based on my personal experience with a house across Highland Ave from me. My house, although the street address is Gloucester's, is on the corner with Highland Ave, and my neighbor across the street recently went before the zoning board to get a special permit for a large-scale addition. The process started in 2014, and I have an example of the first reiteration, which included a 4-car underground garage and essentially duplicating the first house by making a slightly larger exact replica of it stuck to the side of the first house. The neighborhood came out, let me pass that in. The neighborhood came out in the special permit proceeding and had the opportunity to address the zoning board, and it said that this house, this proposal, which would have been 8,900 square feet, was not in keeping with the neighborhood, which basically consists of 2,000 square foot houses. With the 4-car underground garage and the extra wide driveway and 2 garage doors, bays, the neighborhood was very concerned about the scale of this proposal. And the zoning board did not look upon it favorably as well. As a result, they came back with a second proposal, which is what was actually built, and was much more in keeping with the neighborhood, although it was still very large at 6,450 square feet. It had 1 garage door bay, did not have a double wide driveway, and was much more acceptable to the neighborhood. Let me show you what the final plans look like, and you can see this is what has just been built. I'm here to tell you that the special permit process worked. It made a better plan, and it made something that the neighborhood was happy with, and you didn't have a large warehouse-like facade with associated 4-car underground parking associated with it, which would not have been in harmony with the neighborhood. However, looming over the whole proceeding was the threat that they would just tear down everything that was there and build to the maximum extent of the lot line without a special permit and without neighborhood input because of the loophole now that we are trying to close with this article. And I feel sorry for the other neighborhoods where somebody can just come in and, without giving any notice to the neighbors, build things of this structure which were said to comply with zoning in terms of height and setbacks. The building department said that the initial proposal passed, and it was really just in terms of scale. Now, I would ask that you give other communities, other neighborhoods, the right of public participation with a special permit process by including the definition of reconstruction into the requirement for a special permit. It's important to assess the impacts on the surrounding properties in terms of light, drainage, shadowing, and proximity, and just keeping the new structures in harmony with the traditional streetscape and the surrounding community. At the end of the process, the homeowner here actually thanked the zoning board for making him go back to the drawing board because he recognized that it was a better process and a better plan and a better structure that was more harmonious with the surroundings. And I think that you would find that if you would have a similar result if you added reconstruction to close this loophole and allow the community to have input into the process. A special permit is not an onerous requirement, it's not a variance, but here you have an opportunity for public input, and we would appreciate your consideration of this article. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
Good evening. My name is Steve McKenna. I live at 4 Upland Road in Arlington, Mass. I'm also a real estate broker here at Bose Real Estate for the last 30 years. I think it's important. I'm going to talk about what you and the board have just approved, also the articles that are in front of us.
I'd ask you just to keep it as far as...
I will try to keep it as close as that, but you'll see me coming back more and more, so I'll try to appreciate that. If we were to look at what you have proposed and approved on your presentations just earlier, and the future ones we're going to discuss, if you take an average home in the town of Arlington that was built prior to 1980, and between 1940 and 1980, where they have 50-foot lots, on a lot that's 5,000 square feet, and their neighbors are 7.5 feet off the lot line. If a neighbor on the right side and on the left side of a house that wants to put an addition has already put an addition on, because of the setbacks and the dimensional requirements you're requiring with height, side setbacks, rear setbacks, square footage of open space, impervious areas. I have a chart here, and a gentleman made it for me, that shows that on a 50-foot lot, if someone is on each side of a neighbor that has an approved addition, the addition that they would be able to put in is 5 feet wide. They would not be allowed to put a family room or a kitchen. And I can appreciate what the board, what the neighbors, what the citizens, and everybody is trying to do. And with all due respect to my fellow real estate brokers here, in 30 years, I don't think people have been in as many homes and have met with many homeowners than I have. People are buying in this community, staying in this community, and want to live in this community. And you've heard from other homeowners as well that want to put an addition on their home. There's a woman that I have met that's on Claremont Ave. Last year was desirous of selling her home, and we discussed it. She met with a contractor, decided to stay in the community that she wanted to. She has spent the last year with getting approvals for financing, speaking with architects, deciding on which contractors to do. She has come to the plan. She's hired a contractor ready to go based upon all of the requirements that you have now, and we're piecemealing them, and you can't piecemeal these. You have to put these all together. This woman can no longer put the addition on her home with her husband. They have 2 children, a third on the way. These are people that want to stay and live in this community and thrive with the community. And all of these, because they're being piecemealed, you're not looking at as a whole. You're tearing it apart bit by bit. And with respect to what everybody's wanting and desirous of doing, you're taking away the homeowner's rights. The big elephant in the room is a lot of people are unhappy with what the new development looks like. Let's face facts, that's what it is. Can some of these new developments be better looking? Absolutely. Can they be a little bit smaller? Absolutely. But there's a lot of misinformation being given to you and to the public, and I have data to support that, and I'd like to go over it. Now, I can come up every single time, or if you allow me 3 minutes or 5 minutes to give you the information and data, I think it's critical, because these are everybody's homes. The biggest thing someone has in their life is the pride of owning a home next to their family. And you're taking away, forget about the developers and builders. We all know that that's business for them. We want to work with them. We want them to create good properties, good homes. But all of these regulations that you are putting forth are really putting a hindrance on many, many people. There was a gentleman here that got up and left, talked about his family trying to do it. The woman I just talked about on Claremont Street, her family, there are many, many people in the town that are trying to renovate their homes and stay in their home. So if you grant me 2 minutes more, I'd just like to answer a few of the things that were brought up in the previous meeting that I spoke to, as well as items that were brought up here, and then I will leave you alone for the rest of the evening.
Go ahead.
Thank you. One of the things that was mentioned in the previous meeting is that Arlington does not have a diversity of housing, that there is too much construction going on, that we're building McMansions, and Arlington is no longer being an affordable community. I've taken the data from 2012, January 1st, to March 18th of this year. Now, these are only sales that I have access through multiple listing, which is a large share of the amount of homes sold. If you look at it for single-family homes, between $200,000 and $499,000, 330 homes have been sold. The average square footage is 1,355 square feet, and the average sales price was $433,000. Between $500,000 and $599,000, another 295 homes have been sold, where the average square footage is 1,675 square feet. Many of those homes had additions put on them, and that sales price was $548,000. From $600,000 to $799,000, another 360 homes have been sold. Average square footage of 2,066. Average sales price $679,000. $800,000 to $999,000, another 122 homes. Square footage is larger at 2,661 square feet, and the average sales price is $899,000. Then you get to the $1.5 million homes. 74 homes since 2012 have sold, where the square footage is 3,300 square feet. Out of those 74 homes, 47 homes were new construction since 2012, and the average square footage of those homes were 3,039, smaller than the homes that were being proposed, that we're saying McMansions are being built and 4,000 square foot houses are being built. That is not the case. You look at condominiums, the same situation. $100,000 to $399,000, 470 homes, condominiums have been sold at 912 square feet. You carry that on through all of these other homes in condominiums. We are a very diverse community in homes, in people, in genders, in everything here. This is a community that people are moving into. 30 years ago when I started here, people were moving into the town and then leaving because of the school systems. Everyone is now staying because of the school systems. The thing that hasn't changed is it's young couples that are coming into Arlington because it's accessibility and affordability. We are more affordable and more accessible than the communities surrounding us. And that is where we have affordable housing. Now, unfortunately, affordable housing isn't for everyone, where a lot of people are spending $1 million on homes. But this shows you that there's a balance. What we don't have is a balance in the zoning bylaws to protect the homeowners that are currently owning their homes, and what you're trying to achieve is to restrict and provide good, safe, affordable, new housing. Every developer in this room wants to build in this community because, yes, they can make a profit, but there isn't a single home that has been built or condominium renovated or two-family renovated that hasn't sold. These are selling to families that want this community to thrive. Your master plan is exactly what should have happened 10 years ago. It is supporting growth in the community. If you take bit by bit every single part of your zoning bylaws and you look at what you're doing, you're going to limit growth in this town. The people that have been in their homes for 40 or 50 years truly will not be able to sell their homes at the value that they want to, because you're going to restrict a potential buyer from wanting to build it because they can't expand the size of it. Families aren't coming into Arlington now to buy a 1950 Cape that's a 3-bedroom home at 900 square feet or 1,200 square feet. They're buying them, like this gentleman said, with the future that they've bought into a great town, and then they can expand their home. These bylaws that you're talking about cannot do that. You're talking, I mentioned before that you're talking about pushing the houses back and pushing the setbacks further back. Well, if you look at the homes built in 1930, Arlington, as said before, is not a flat community. We have hills everywhere. So push the setbacks forward and put the garages in the rear. That will avoid everyone's concern about the eye appeal and the grade and so forth. But unfortunately, our zoning bylaws don't allow that, because you can't have, with the requirements of open space, you can't use your driveway as open space. So there's got to be, instead of looking at every piecemeal that you're trying to do, which I applaud all of you, and I applaud the citizens for their concerns, because everybody has a right to feel comfortable in the community. But what you're doing is you're not looking at the entire zoning bylaws. I can tell you, Inspectional Service Department, they have to be mathematicians now to understand what we're trying to do with grades and everything. But in addition, my final comment, for every homeowner that's trying to put an addition on their home and make it work for them, they're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars more that the contractor is going to have to charge them to hire an attorney and review the condominium, to review the zoning bylaws and understand them. I don't think many people in this room can understand what these bylaws are saying. Then they have to take every bit and piece to understand what the setbacks are, the grade differential, the size, the FAR, the open space, and now you're talking about a special permit. All of these are going to hurt the homeowner. Yes, the big elephant in the room is we want better construction. I think if you put a board together, you can create that. But what's being built is being sold because there's a need for it. And the homes built in 1940 and 1950, which I'm sure homeowners back then didn't want to see, they were the exact same homes on every street in the Appleton, off of Appleton Street, every home near the Thompson School. But that was the need then, and we have a need now, and we have to address the need that this community is seeing. And the last comment is what Jim Doherty was talking about. Although you can't attribute all of the income on the property taxes to just the new construction, but when you look at all the two-family homes or small single-family homes on R2 lots that were torn down, and their values were at $500,000, and now you have two townhouses at about 2,000 square feet selling for $800,000, this is growth that the town needs to support the community and the schools. And that's the biggest thing. There's an $11,000 increase in the last 3 years in property tax. A lot of that is due to the builders, due to the contractors renovating their homes, and the homeowners doing it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Sir.
Hi, I'm Paul Parisi. I live on Hemlock Street, and I'm a native of Arlington, and I've lived in Arlington for the last 35 years with my wife. I'd like to give you my perspective on some of the proposed zoning changes and how I think it may affect some of the people in this. I'm at the point now, I guess I would be considered a retiree. I think Arlington is a very attractive town for retirees because it has a good location, it has public transportation, and it has smaller homes that are very useful.
I want to keep this discussion to Article 15, which is on the table right now.
And I'm coming to that. As part of that, I endorse most of the articles, including Article 15, that Mr. Warden has proposed. I may not agree with the full details of every one, but certainly I agree with the intent of that article. Right now, if you look at some of the smaller homes in town, they're slowly being squeezed out. I have a smaller home. I have a non-conforming lot. I'm also surrounded by conforming lots. It is possible that I could have in the future large McMansions built literally around me and towering over me. It'll change the character of my home entirely. My home will lose significant value because I will lose light, I will lose sun, I will lose air, I will lose view. I've already lost part of my view with the Sims facility being built. Put a house next to me and I'll lose it all entirely. So I realize people have to make a living. I realize houses will be upgraded and construction will go on. But I think there has to be a balance. One thing that I don't see being considered or discussed at all is how people that have non-conforming lots are impacted by all this, and how it would fit in that you can preserve their lifestyle if they prefer to have it that way, as it is. That covers most of the points I think I wanted to go over. I would urge the board to consider being very careful in how they balance the needs of new construction, new residences in the town with existing homeowners like myself who would like to remain in Arlington in my existing home and not be buried under an avalanche of new construction. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving forward, let's keep the discussion to the article at hand, please. Right now we're discussing Mr. Warden's Article 15 regarding large additions.
May I speak, Mr. Chair?
Please.
Jim Doherty, 16 Spy Pond Parkway. One is, I think we have to kind of get out of the mindset, this is all about what developers want, what developers don't want. Forget about the developers. It's as much as, with all due respect to Steve, a real estate broker, a closing attorney, a surveyor, or anything else. This is about homeowners' choices. People aren't building these things, people aren't doing additions because, you know, there's just money dropping out of the sky. People want these things. I want to give a very brief history on this because I don't think we should be amending it. I think we should be repealing it. It's an illegal taking of people's land. As the young lady mentioned earlier, in many of these cases, if it's a legal conforming lot, you can tear the place down and build something as big as this, okay, the 750 square feet. So in essence, it's an illegal taking of someone's land. And this it's very regressive because for the big property owners, it's probably not going to affect them that much. For the smaller people who we've heard a lot about tonight, you know, it really kills them. Very quickly, and then I'll close on this comment. Check the history of this. It resonated from Dow Ave. What took place there was basically a house that was, and it was in the early 80s, I believe, John. It was a house that was probably like a Gambrel colonial, maybe about 1,700 square feet. What someone wanted to do for their family member, which, you know, God bless them, but if I lived next door, I would have been upset as well. They attached it by a small breezeway, and they built a similar size house. So in essence, it was building an entire house behind this house on a very narrow lot backing up to Dallin School. So at the time, it probably worked out well. But when you're bringing into a lot of the things that you guys are already trying to remedy, and in particular, if you get into setbacks, it's really, there's no need for this. And, you know, we all talk softly about a special permit like, hey, what's the big deal? It's a special permit. Well, it's a big deal if the people need that bedroom soon and they can't move in there. It's a big deal when you want to put on a $20, $30, $40, $50, $60,000 addition and it's another $5,000 to go through that process in 6-month delay. So I would just ask you to consider those things. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Klein.
Just briefly and very particular to the article. The line hereinafter, the purpose of this section collectively referred to as alteration, is combining terms that are reconstruction and replacement and alteration that are all defined independently in the building code, and it might cause a confusion as to what exactly is intended. So I ask that if those terms are going to be used, that they actually be used and not referred to collectively.
Thank you. Mr. Beck.
Hi, Michael Beck. I'm totally in favor to the example of that 8,000-foot, reconstruction going before the Zoning Board of Appeals. The appeals process I agree with. I like it. There was a similar house that went before that, and I attended the ZBA when Tulamary was there. Yet, by removing the foundation piece from this, any ranch right now that is, 800 or 1,000 or 1,100 square foot ranch, to add a second floor that will now automatically go to the appeals process, I recommend that if you do remove the foundation language, that you increase the building to 1,500 square feet or something appropriate like that. Because what you'll do is all of the ranches in town will now have to flow to the Zoning Board of Appeals just to add a second floor. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment regarding Article 15? Mike.
Yeah, I agree with the last commenter on a concern. I think the other part is I think the 8,000 square foot house down to 6,400 through the special permit process worked the right way, which means that it's working as far as that one's concerned. So I guess I'm not quite sure I understand that as an example of why we should go here. So I'm not in favor of this article, so.
That's what I have.
Ken?
Yeah, I would agree with Mike here. I think this article is a little too aggressive as far as taking away the foundation clause. I think what's existing by law already they should be able to rebuild within zoning, the setbacks, the open area and everything else within the footprint. That's what they had before. I think that is reasonable. I think people who have bought houses with that assumption of saying, I can grow into this neighborhood, we're taking that away. I know you're adding an extra step of special permit, but that just adds one more layer or one more threshold that makes it harder for that person to achieve this. Some people may feel that, yes, you just go to get a special permit, but that delays it, it adds extra cost, and sometimes people are just at the brink of doing that addition to get their family to stay in this neighborhood. I don't think it's doubling the size of the building. It's what's allowed by zoning. I think we're not taking something away or that's already existing. That's my feeling, and I would not support this article here.
Thank you. Andy?
I guess I would agree with that at this point. I don't actually understand how it's going to operate. I guess I will agree with this group here on this one.
I think I understand the intent behind this, and I think it gets at a problem that many in town perceive to exist, but I don't necessarily think that this particular article is the way to go about preventing that. So I'd stand with my colleagues on that. Thank you. Moving back to Article 11.
Can you go to 14 and 16?
I'm sorry?
We have to get home, 14 and 16. Article.
We'll get there.
No, you got him to 16.
We'll get there. Ms. Evans, Article 11, please.
Winnell Evans, Orchard Place. This article concerning garage entrance locations attempts to address the same issue that the Redevelopment Board's Article 10 addresses, which is dealing with the concerns that many people have expressed through the Planning Committee and through the master plan process about the double width, below grade driveways, which are also part of the facade of the house. So you may have anywhere from 3 to 4 stories of a flat facade with a large cavern in front of it of asphalt. The issue with this is that it is changing the character of neighborhoods, changing drastically the streetscapes by removing front yards, by removing trees, by removing sidewalks, and by removing health strips, that little strip of city-owned grass between the street and the sidewalk. So what this bylaw revision would do is require front-facing garage entrances to be set back from the front line facade of the house by at least 10 feet. Now, many people have said, well, if you look at older houses in Arlington, many of them have a garage door which is part of the facade, and this is true, but they are almost entirely single-width garages, and many of them are set back, even if it's just by a few feet, and they do not have the entire height of the house above them. So they present a very different appearance. So currently there are no bylaws regulating attached garage placement, only the curb cut bylaw, which we have already discussed. So it is the hope that this would deal with this issue where we're obliterating our front yards. And if you want to see an example of what this looks like when it becomes the norm in a neighborhood, I would suggest you drive down Dorothy Road in East Arlington, where you can see many of these duplexes in a row where the front yards are gone. They've just disappeared, and there are no trees left on the street anymore either. So the hope is that this will deal with this by spurring more creative, better design and preserve our streetscapes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Beck.
I completely agree with the intent of this article, but if anyone were to take a walk along College Ave from Crosby to Ridge, you will find one of the nicest streets in Arlington that has exactly what you have described. All of the garages are two-car garages in the front, 25-foot setback. They're beautiful. It's a great street. So I disagree with pulling back the garages 10 feet from that setback line to make them 35 feet back. That would have changed that dynamic completely on College Ave. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Carl Tamayan. If the board is going to consider this proposal, I would respectfully suggest that it should be amended to reflect a detached garage. A number of homes currently have attached garages, and homes being constructed have attached garages. And if this provision were to pass as it is written, those homes would have to be 35 feet back. Most people would prefer to have a larger backyard than a front yard for the children to play in. So to the extent we want to limit where a garage is situated, I would respectfully suggest that it be amended to reflect a detached garage, not an attached garage.
Thank you. Mr. Loretti.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify on that last point, I think as the board knows, if you have a detached garage, it has to be in the back corner of the lot. You really don't want to be sticking a detached garage next to your neighbor's side yard, which, because of the way the bylaw is written, could be, I guess, within 10 feet. You would have to be within 10 feet if it's in the side yard. If it's in the rear yard, it can be set back 0 feet. I don't think we want to be encouraging side yard garages.
Thank you. Further comment?
Hi, Jonathan Nyberg, 129 Lake Street. Just help me if you can. I'm just trying to visualize this, and maybe I'm reading this incorrectly. The way I read it and see it and understand it, so if you have a house, sort of like Mr. Beck said, that has a house with a two-car, either going in front, whether it's lower or street level, it sounds like now they're requesting that you're going to have 10 foot of overhang house. Is that possible? And then you're going to have, your front of your house is going to be here, and then 10 feet later, right, it's going to start the garage. And which I think that's even uglier. So I don't think, I respect the intent, but I don't know as though the end result is going to produce a more attractive product. Again, I think the elephant in the room is the two-family ones that are built with the garages under. I think that's where the issue lies. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think the fact is the first speaker, the proponent, mentioned something that works well, a side garage, with the house and everything else, and that wouldn't be allowed under this. So I don't quite understand how, if you don't like that particular aesthetic, maybe I can understand that, but I don't think that we can go this far with respect to dealing with setbacks on the garage. I think, at this point, it just doesn't necessarily work. I think there must be a different way, and I'd suggest maybe going through the bylaw to see maybe a different way of tackling your concern with respect to streetscape. I think the driveways are allowed, and it is what it is. So I think it needs to maybe be, this is very creative, maybe even something a little less creative would work a little bit better. I'm not exactly sure what. So So I won't be voting for this particular article.
I tend to agree that the intent of this is a good one, noble one, where we want to address issues of out of scale parking garages. We have these double garage doors. I think what this does, I'm not exactly comfortable with. It either pushes the building too far back, which would give less space in the back, or it would create I don't know, maybe an awkward overhang, where the building overhangs it a funny way, and I'm not even sure how that's done. And then also, it may also give an opportunity to park more cars out front. I don't know. I mean, I just don't think this way of addressing that issue is quite right, and I can't seem to support this.
Andy?
I agree with you, Ken. I will not support this.
I echo, again, the opinions of my colleagues. I think the intent is good. I just don't think we can zone out aesthetics here. So I won't be able to support this in its current form. Moving on to Article 12. Consider the request of Winnell Evans again.
This one is fairly straightforward. This article attempts to control the size of new construction and large additions by making clear that full-size lots must have rear yards which are at least 20 feet of the lot depth, not just 20% of the lot depth, which in some cases may be actually less than 20 feet. Currently, this setback requirement specifies 20 feet, but not more than 20% of lot depth for all lots. If revised, the 20% exception would apply only to undersized, non-conforming lots. So that's fairly straightforward.
Public comment on this article. Mike?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say on this one. This one I found to be very confusing. As simple as it is, as the change is, I'm just ignoring.
Can you guys all speak up?
Sorry, my bad. I was saying, you know, it's funny, it is probably the simplest of them, but I'm still scratching my head at it. So I'm gonna turn it over to Ken, because at this point, I'm not exactly sure in my own head the ramifications of this moving forward. Exactly, you know, the dimensional requirements, et cetera. So I think at this point, I'm not going to be able to support it, given that, you know, we've got a couple moving parts here, and I'm not comfortable in changing this particular one, so.
Okay.
This actually is one that I'm willing to support with one minor change. And just in the verbiage where it says if the lot is the correct size. All right, I think a lot can be at the correct size but non-conforming. It could be a long rectilinear site. And I think that is unfortunate to just rule that out altogether. So I would support that if it was, that one word was stricken from this.
I'm sorry, the word is?
Hold on 1 minute here, and I thought I had it marked out here.
The article as it would read would be in the R0, R1, and R2 districts, the rear yard need not be more than 20% of the full lot depth for lots that do not meet the minimum lot size requirement.
Yes, but what if the lot is it does meet the lot size requirements, but it's more rectilinear lengthwise.
Right, right. It's a percentage versus a metrical measurement issue.
Correct. So maybe that's why maybe me and Mike here are sharing the same confusion here now. Can you give an example of what you're saying here?
Well, you could have a lot, for instance, where 75% of the lot, where the remaining 25%, I should say, of the lot could be less than 20 feet, even in a large lot, depending on how things are built on that lot. So what we're looking for is to make those, the dimensions and the metrical measurement the same, to control for that.
What would happen, for example, okay, if you had a legal lot, 6,000 square feet, okay, and it's not your typical 50 feet or 60 feet. Let's say it's 100 feet or something like that. I'm not sure, okay? I'm not that familiar, maybe sharing the same thing with Mike here.
100 feet's easy math. Let's leave it 100 feet.
Say it's 100 feet, okay? Then are you still saying we still need that setback, or can it be a percentage?
Yes, and we're saying that that 20% setback should also be 20 feet. So even if it were a lot that were, for instance, under the 100 feet, the 20% would still be, it would be 20% or 20 feet.
No, but the house, the depth of the lot is only 60 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really the problem. I mean, this
20
is
20
difficult.
feet. 20 feet.
It's very hard to understand that.
Yes, it's a hard thing to picture. I struggled with this a lot. It's,
Can I say? Yeah, sorry. And I think this was the problem I had too. Was frankly, you know, I don't think this does work. Certainly in my neighborhood, where it's a bunch of very skinny lots all the way down. You know, the 20%. Yeah, that's rear as well as front, and they're conforming. So if you're 6,000 square feet, I've got you know, a run of maybe 120 out front, 50 in the back, or 60 or what have you. Then you know, 20 of that's going to come up. So I guess I'm not there. So I'm not. Yeah. I mean,
Mr. Chairman, can I try to clarify, because I think there's a lot of
do.
confusion on this. To the case that was just mentioned, most lots in town are deeper than they are wide.
Ooh, okay.
Yes, absolutely. If you just look at the GIS system, in most lots are, you know, 60 feet or less wide. If they're a conforming lot, then they've got to be over 100 feet. That's pure math. If they're over 100 feet, the zoning bylaw says right now that your required minimum rear yard depth is 20 feet. There is absolutely no change under this proposed change in that situation. This change only applies to lots that meet the minimum requirement, either 6,000 square feet in the R1, for example, R2, or 9,000 in the R0 zone, that tend to be wide and shallow.
Yeah.
If it's less than 100 feet deep, then all it says is that the 20-foot setback requirement still applies for lots that are, you know, meet the minimum lot size requirements. So if you have a lot that's 100 feet wide and 60 feet deep right now,
you can have 12 feet.
Right now you can have a 12-foot backyard. This would say you've got to have a 20-foot backyard.
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure everyone's clear.
No. I do get that.
Okay.
I understand.
But again, it's only for lots that meet the minimum lot size requirement.
Yep.
So if you had a 5,000 square foot lot,
I understand.
nothing changes.
Andy, any comment on this?
No, not at this point. I don't understand it well enough.
Yes.
I got it.
I'm going to retract my support for this, because I'm not getting this right now. I think I'm a little confused right now. I think we need.
I think we've discussed that one. Moving on, we have discussed both Article 13 and Article 17 in deep already, as well as Article 15. So we are now moving on to Article 14.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm presenting on this one. What this article does is it sets a minimum separation between buildings on adjacent lots. Right now, if you are doing a new development, typically for single-family, two-family homes, you would have to have a 10-foot setback for the side yard, which would mean the structures themselves are 20 feet apart. What this does is increases that to 30 feet. And the reason for that, I think if you read in the purpose of the zoning bylaw, one is to provide adequate light and air between the buildings. What we're seeing now more commonly is instead of the roofs on buildings having the gable facing the street, and of course the backyard, they tend to go side to side. So you have the gable on facing the side yards, which means you can have a wall up to 35 feet high on one lot, and you can have that on the next lot. And so it limits the amount of light that's reaching the building on the adjacent lots. And in particular, as someone mentioned, in a lot of the areas of town where you have non-conforming lots, you may well have less than 10 feet. It may only be 5 to 7 feet. So that simply exacerbates the problem of having inadequate light. And I'll leave with you this figure that I presented to the staff on Friday. Essentially what it's showing is that if you have that situation where you have two houses only 20 feet apart, even in mid-May, your first floor windows are entirely in the shade at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. If you only have 20-foot separation. When you go to 30 feet, then you get sunlight all the way down to the base of the wall at that time. You may be wondering where the heck did this 30 feet come from? I mentioned before I live in East Arlington, in a neighborhood where the houses, while there has been some construction on them, virtually all of them, I think all of them, maintain the same footprint. So my house and my neighbor's house are both on their original footprint, and the side yard on one side is roughly 5 feet. If I measure the distance from my kitchen wall to his house, it's 30 feet or 29 feet. It's essentially the same as what's being proposed here. That's the way the developers developed back in the old days, because they understood how to create the neighborhood to have spacing and air between the homes. And when we talk about new houses coming in being built much bigger out of character, these are big houses in East Arlington. You're getting up to 3,000 square foot houses, 2,800 to 3,000 square foot houses on 5,000 square foot lots. These houses are in demand. I get letters in the mail easily once a month from developers looking to buy. I get letters from people who just want to buy the house and live in it. So, having, and when people buy, as I said, they don't do these great additions. If they make additions at all, it's to the third floor. So I'll leave this with you. I think this is an entirely appropriate response for protecting the character of the neighborhoods as they were built. It doesn't burden the buyers. The buyers still want to come out, and so do the developers. And in other parts of town that aren't as densely developed, I suggest this probably doesn't make much difference anyway, because they already have that 30-foot separation. So I'll leave this with you. Thank you.
Tammy.
Carl Tamayan. As the board is aware, the majority of the lots in Arlington consist of either 50 feet of frontage and 5,000 square feet, or 60 feet of frontage and 6,000 square feet. This Article 14 is a de facto side yard setback, which treats property owners differently based on when they construct their homes or their additions. Basically what it's saying is, if you build after this bylaw passes, disregard the 10-foot setback requirement. If your neighbors on both sides of you have a 7.5-foot side yard setback, you're going to be required to provide, my math is a little off here, 22.5 feet on each side of whatever you propose to build. So if you have a 50-foot wide lot, you're going to end up with, strike that, 50-foot wide lot, you're going to end up with a 5-foot addition, or 5-foot home if it's a vacant 5,000 square foot lot. Similarly, if you have a 50-foot wide lot where your neighbors have 10 feet on each side, you're going to be required to have setbacks of 20 feet on each side of whatever you're constructing, which means you would only end up with a 10-foot wide addition or dwelling. If you happen to be the owner of a 60-foot wide lot, and again, your neighbors have 10-foot wide setbacks, you're going to be required to have 20 feet on each side of whatever you're building, which means you'll only have a 20-foot addition or a 20-foot wide dwelling if it's a vacant lot. In essence, what this is proposing, in my opinion, would be unenforceable on 2 grounds. One, it's a taking without just compensation if you're limiting someone to a 10-foot wide home on a buildable lot. Second, it treats people differently with the application of the law. And on both of those grounds, I would suggest that it's unenforceable and should not be approved.
Thank you.
Paul Parisi, Hemlock Street. I'd like to give the contrary opinion to what you just heard, because I have a home, and on one side is non-conforming, 7.5 feet to the next house on that side. On the other side, I have 7.5 feet to the property line. However, that lot is a conforming lot that's at least 100-foot frontage. And it's about another 10 feet then from my line to his house. So if a large home was built there, I would be buried with a house that's 17.5 feet, if I do my math right, from my side wall, not from my side steps, but from my side wall, where that lot actually has enough room in it to meet this requirement of 30 feet from my side wall to his side wall, because he has at least 100-foot frontage and he can move his house over. Now, I agree with what the last gentleman said. If a person has a very narrow lot, it's a problem. So at the most, you should, or at the least, you should have this as a special permit condition to allow, where there's non-conforming lots that are in this situation, the ability to move that house that's being built next door away from the property line, especially if it's a 2.5-story house that's going to be built. It will not fit, again, with my prior comments that I said about being buried with these large houses that are being put in. This is a perfect example. So I urge you to consider that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Jonathan Nyberg, 129 Lake Street. I'd like to say I do appreciate and agree with the intent of the idea of more light, more space, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think if you take the realistic practicality, again, if you take that 60-foot wide lot, you drop off 20 feet, correct? Because there's a house on each side and they're 10 foot off, so now you have a 20-foot. I mean, I don't see, you know, and it sounds like we're almost getting down to single wides. And I'm telling you, you know, those houses aren't all that marketable. So I think we have setbacks in place. I think they do work. I think if you don't have, if you have a non-conforming setback, and correct me if I'm wrong with the building department, any addition, anything that you do build has to be conforming to those setbacks. So I think that, I think it takes too much away from the homeowner, although I think it's great. And again, larger lots sounds fabulous, but when you get into a lot of East Arlington where I live, you know, a lot of those lots, it's a different type of housing. It's an urban housing setting. It's not a suburban housing. So I really think that what we have works well, and would appreciate it staying that way. Thanks.
Thank you.
Christopher Moore, 80 School Street. My concern with this particular article, and I appreciate the intent of it as well, is that it gives a significant first mover advantage to someone who might choose to build on one side of the line, and disadvantages those who might choose to build or desire to build later. So then you have to look over at your neighbor and try to figure out, you know, is he looking like he might want to build something? I better build first. I think it makes much more sense to try to keep the restrictions on properties with respect to the lot lines rather than with respect to whatever's going on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shawnee Road. I'd just like to reiterate what the previous speaker just said. I think we have setbacks. Adding these kinds of things on top of the setbacks makes it very, very complicated to basically know what you can do when your neighbor will move. It's sort of a, you know, neighborly destruction without meaning to be. Suddenly they own 10 more feet of your land you can't do anything on building-wise. And I think there's so many pieces moving around between the setbacks and these types of zoning, these types of proposals. It's getting very, you know, we're having to thread through a smaller and smaller needle to get everything to kind of work at some point. So I would speak against this, though I do appreciate the idea of getting more light into the houses, but I don't think this is the way to go.
Thank you. Could you?
Your name again?
Mustafa Bar, 26 Shawnee Road.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Sanat Patwari, 16 Kimball Road. The problem I have with this one, my lot is large, 60 feet, but the two houses on two sides, they are already within 10 feet or something like that. I can extend only 5 feet on one side of my house, Other side, or if I want to build something in the back, extra room, with a bathroom. We are senior people, I want to live on the single floor. I want to build it, I would have to put a 10-foot offset for the addition from one end of it. Other end, if I can put only 5 feet, my garage entrance is about 8-9 feet. I couldn't even put the house to get into the garage without building anything like that. Last year, one side where we have it, larger area, I have like 25 feet out there. The other neighbor, they have about 10 feet. Last year's big snowstorm and everything like that, they had 3 cars to put in a garage, all the snow. I let them put it in my driveway. So this is something, you are taking property without payment. You're going to end up with a lot of lawsuits. If people can't build it, you are going to lose tax money. And I don't know how much town can afford the lawsuits.
Thank you. Any further comment? Public. Mike?
Yeah, I agree with the general comments about first mover advantage in this particular thing. I mean, making it subject to what your neighbor has either done or is going to do is a really not the way to go, in my opinion. So yeah. I will be against this.
Neighbor already has a 3,000
Yep. No. Understood.
Thank you.
Understood.
Yeah.
I would agree. I can't support this. I think it's the idea is great as far as getting more lighting in, but this action here causes unfair advantages, and just I think it's taken. I don't think this is right.
Disharmony.
Yeah.
Andy?
I agree with my group here.
I agree with Mike and Andy and Ken. I think this is, it's unenforceable, it's unequitable, and I don't think it's something that I can support. Thank you. We have discussed Article 15. We'll move on to Article 16. Division of height calculation. Mr. Ward.
Well, Article 16, and I sent this over on Friday, I think, to the planning department, and for some reason the town filter thoughts quarantined it, so Ms. Raitt didn't see it until sometime this afternoon, but I guess she has now made it available to you. Is that you now have it? So, and I have a few copies here if anyone else wants to look at it.
Which is most accurate here? This is
in this case, the vote that we are proposing is slightly. That's the same thing that she printed for you. The vote that she is the vote that we are proposing is somewhat different from the zoning article. I have to clear this with Mr. Leone, but it's substantially the same. And the idea is that we would, right now the definition of height is pretty complicated, and it depends on things like the grade being more than 5% and the original grade and stuff. And the problem is that the measurements, the height measurement of 35 feet, which we're not seeking to change, is measured from the grade before any construction starts. And so I don't know how they do this, or how they put that marker in space once the ground is cut away deep enough to build that 2-car garage going in at grade on a slopey lot. So we thought it a simpler and more comprehensible. You talk about complications that people have to worry about. This is one size fits all. 35 feet is 35 feet. From the bottom to the top, 35 feet. That's high enough for a house. So that is what is proposed here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any public comment on Article 16?
Christopher Moore, 80 School Street again. In this particular article, I'm concerned about the areas of town where the slope is significant from the front to the back of the lot, for instance, where the lot slopes downhill. If you move from counting the height of the structure from the curb, to, say, the average around the whole structure, you might get a very different answer and a big change in what's possible in various lots. And that would be driven primarily by just the slope of the lot. It makes more sense to me to focus on what things look like from the front, since part of what we're trying to do is keep the streetscapes consistent and reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Jonathan Nyberg, 129 Lake Street, and if I need to be corrected, please help me. But the way I understand the way it reads now, it's the average. So if you're building a house and you've got an exposed walkout basement or a 2-car garage under, 35 feet is the average of all the different points. So if you have
the grade before construction starts.
I think it includes the whole thing actually, because
From Mike.
well, that's not the way it's not the way it's enforced. It's enforced that it's the average of all the points. So I think
Mike burned it, too.
well, anyway. Yeah. Anyway, that's not the way it's enforced. So I think that the 35-foot taking all the points does make a nice product. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I don't think it's...
Thank you. Jim Doherty, 16 Spy Pond Parkway. Just briefly, the 35 feet, whether it's the average, as was pointed out before, and that's typically exactly how it would be done. However, before we even got to that, this really changes it, because what this is really saying is from the floor of the garage. Okay, so you're adding a lot on before you get to your 30 feet, before we talk about your average or the actual place before. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Michael Beck, I just want to reiterate that in the hilly neighborhoods where I live, this would be a game changer for everyone living in capes and ranches. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think more than 50% of the houses in Arlington, they are on the hill. And if you start counting from the bottommost point from one end, there are a lot of houses where the front or side of the house is 1 story higher, where you might be entering or going out, or your backyard or something like that. So I think that you count 35 feet above the basement, that's fine.
Thank you.
Elizabeth Pyle again, 66 Gloucester Street. This is an easy, common sense way to enforce it, and I appreciate that some houses are on slopes, but that's how they read. If you're on a slope and you build a first level garage and then 35 feet above that, you have created an enormous structure. We're not changing the height requirement with this, it's just making it easy for everybody to understand. And it matters how the house looks from the front and from the back. Just because you're a rear abutter looking at something doesn't give you any less rights than a front abutter from the street. Many of the houses that are currently being approved read like 3.5-story houses, and it's problematic. And the situation across the street on Highland Avenue from myself, the initial plan made it look like a 3.5-story house, and according to the building inspector, that was allowed. The final plan, it reads like a 2.5-story house, which is what is appropriate under the bylaw. And I'll tell you, the whole neighborhood was up in arms about this, with the height requirement not being 35 feet in actuality. And this is an easy to enforce measure. I would encourage you to adopt it. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comment? Mike?
Yes, in the Heights, this doesn't work. You know, all of the houses, Cape, Ranch, whatever else, Colonial, we start off on a 4.5-foot retaining wall and then take it from there. So, you know, it doesn't make sense necessarily from my perspective to be doing one thing in one spot of the town and another in the other areas of town. So from that perspective, I won't support this particular provision.
Kim?
Same here. I don't think I can't see supporting this because it seems once again the thought is nice that to maintain the buildings at a smaller scale, but I think when you take in account of how this fits in with say, half Arlington with all the hills and so forth like that, it really limits and takes away a lot of people's rights that I don't think we can do. That's why I can't really seem to support this, unless I'm misunderstanding this. The way I see it right now, it is really limiting heights of the buildings, especially on the hilly parts where the front yard, like Mike said, you know,
We start with a 4-foot.
it's up there. It's already up. It's a half a story up already, you know? So I don't think it's fair, you know, for the town.
Andy?
I think we should stick with the average grade. If you're on a slope, it's a give and take. You get a little bit more by taking the average grade rather than trying to measure your 35 feet from the highest point. Or the lowest point. So I think it's okay the way it is right now.
That's not what the bylaw reads right now.
What does the bylaw read now?
Bylaw says on a slope of more than 5%, it's the grade before construction starts.
The average grade.
Before construction starts.
The average grade all the
When they cut
way.
it way down, you add, just like in her example, you have to cut it way down. But you cut it way down, you add another 12 feet into the building.
Yeah, but the allowable height of 35 feet is taken from the existing average grade, not from the new.
No, it says as it existed before construction started.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, please. Andy?
I'd like to,
Further?
no, but I'd like to know the answer to that question.
Could you approach the microphone then? Ms. Evans, please, thank you.
The current bylaw, height of building definition is the vertical distance of the highest point of the roof above the average grade of the curb line abutting the property. In the R0, R1, and R2 zoning districts where the lot has a slope in excess of 5%, the height is the vertical distance of the highest point of the roof above the average finished grade of the ground adjoining the building as computed before the building is actually erected. This definition excludes penthouses, bulkheads, and other allowable superstructures above the roof line.
Right.
So that's what Andy's been saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's weird. I think it should stay at this point.
I agree. At this time, we have discussed all the articles. The board will now be voting. I do want to clarify, just in case there's some confusion in the room, that this board is not enacting any of these articles this evening. We are simply voting whether to recommend action or recommend no action to town meeting. That none of these articles that have been proposed are law as of midnight tonight. This has to go before a town meeting, and there will be additional discussion there. Lots of it. So, just in case there was any question of what was taking place tonight, beginning with Article.
Can you go?
You want me to do it?
Oh, yes,
11.
yes, please.
11? So, beginning in Article 11, I move that the redevelopment board recommend no action.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Article 12.
On Article 12, I move to, that the board recommend to town meeting no action on Article 12.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Article 13, I move to approve the recommendation of the board, the redevelopment board, of no action on Article 13. I'm getting tired.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. On Article 14, I move to approve the recommendation of the redevelopment board of no action on Article 14.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. On Article 15, I move to approve the recommendation of the redevelopment board of no action on Article 15.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. On Article 16, I move to approve the recommendation of the redevelopment board of no action on Article 16.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. And on Article 17, I move to approve the recommendation of the redevelopment board of no action on Article 17.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Minutes. At this point, I will close the public hearing. The board has additional business to discuss this evening, so if you could take any side discussions out to the hallway or downstairs, please. We have one piece of new business. There's a housing production plan, public forum, Thursday, April 7th in this room, beginning at 6:45 p.m. Any other business to be discussed?
That you're gonna have to approve the housing production plan when it's adopted, when it's finished.
Should we go to the meeting, or?
Yeah.
We'll try to do that.
Okay, I'll try. I mean, this is something that interests me.
Yeah.
I'll be there already.
So we have to notify the public?
Tell Laura.
Well, if it's only the two of them, I think we're okay, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's on a phone.
Any additional business we haven't discussed this evening that you'd like to reopen?
I have nothing.
Discuss. Next meeting is April 4th. Be busy.
We'll be busy on that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
248 SF.
Okay.
And
You'll have a report to look at.
For that.
Yeah, no, for town meeting.
Oh, right. Yep.
The April 4th is the town meeting.
When will we get that? When will we? No, April 25th.
Okay, so where's the April 4th meeting? April?
a week before the
Awesome.
regular meeting.
Okay, at our.
Awesome.
Our usual
By
spot.
email, et cetera.
Of course.
Once you let email, then we'll give you a
Yep.
report back.
No, that'd be great. If you can get that done, that'd be super.
All right. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.